My name is Andrew Calgren, and it is slightly after 10 o'clock on August the 16th. I'm here with Don Collings at the downtown location for oral history. Mr. Collings, how are you today?
I'm well, thank you very much.
Great. Can you start off by telling us where and when you were born?
I was born in Williston, North Dakota, May the 14th of 1947.
Okay.
I'm a farm kid. So we lived in a farm northwest of Williston, North Dakota, and that's essentially where life began, if you will, for me.
And did you spend most of your young years in North Dakota?
Yes. I did not leave, maybe an occasional trip to Montana, and the rest of the time was all in North Dakota, primarily in the northwest part of North Dakota. Pretty much until I came into the military, there was one little side trip off where I was on a when I was 19 years old, where I made a trip to Oklahoma on a combine crew, and but the rest of the time I was all in North Dakota.
Okay. How did you like growing up in North Dakota?
Well, in hindsight, I enjoyed it. At the time, I was looking for a way out, as many people are looking for an opportunity to get away from where they were born. But in hindsight, it was a good life.
That's great. What did you like to do for fun when you weren't working on the farm?
Well, I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. And there were varying types of livestock, normally horses, that we kept around, and as a result of that, we spent a fair amount of time on them. We had a pond as such, a creek, depending on who's telling the story, and we spent a lot of time on that in the summertime. And in the wintertime, it was a little bit cold, so who knows what we would be doing. We may be outside sledding, or we may have been sitting in the house at a warm spot, playing cards or other games.
That's fun. Yeah, when you say creek, depending on where it was, I said, yeah, depending on which side of the Mason-Dixon line you come from.
Absolutely right. It was a creek to us.
What did your parents do? Did they both work on the farm?
Essentially, yes. My father was a farmer and also worked in the oil field a little bit. Okay. When oil was discovered in North Dakota, and they started doing a lot of production or a lot of drilling, wildcat drilling and so on, my dad went to work on that, and that's what he basically did for a number of years. It was during that time frame when my grandfather, 1956, he was working on an oil field, and he got hit alongside the head with a piece of drilling pipe and knocked him unconscious, and he was unconscious for the next 7 years, and plus basically in a vegetative state in a hospital. And my mother went to work as an aide because he had to have somebody there 24 hours, 7 days a week. And so she was one of those, and she worked the night shift. So she would drive 20 miles from the farm into town, work the shift, and that's what got her started into the nurse's aide world. And that's where she was until she retired 20-some years ago.
Wow.
And my father worked in the oil field for majority of that time, and then he passed away in 1973.
Okay. And your father had served in World War II, right?
My father served in World War II, that's correct. He was an aviation electrician, never left the United States. But he flew as an air crewman out of Jacksonville, Florida.
Okay. Did he talk much about his service?
Not really.
Okay. Just
bits and pieces of it. Unfortunately, we didn't talk a lot about that kind of stuff. All I know is he worked as a crewman on some type of a patrol ship a patrol plane that was primarily flew from Florida north. How far north, I don't know.
Okay.
But they were home based out of Jacksonville.
Were there a lot of veterans around you when you were growing up?
Not really. North Dakota is kind of sparsely populated to start with, and I'm sure that there were others, neighbors and so on and so forth, that likely had been in the service, but I never really had any contact with them in regards, any discussion with them in regards to that. So I can't really say that we had a lot. I know that there were, but I didn't know that until many years later.
Okay. Did your father ever encourage you to join the military?
Not really. I knew he was in the Navy, and that was pretty much it. I knew it, and that probably had some influence on my coming in, but that certainly wasn't the main driver.
Okay. So, growing up in a small farm in the far northern part of the country, how aware of events going on in the world were you?
Oh, I think I was reasonably aware. Our means of getting information was via radio and television, and television was fairly new in the world when I was growing up. I guess to some degree we got our news from, I think it was NBC. I remember David Brinkley and somebody else that were doing the NBC broadcast back in those days. But I think I was aware, but I wasn't a big history buff as such.
Okay. Yeah, and next question was going to be, so the main sources were mostly TV and news.
TV, radio.
Newspaper?
I was a big reader. Was then, still am.
So you were pretty young at the time, but do you remember anything about Korea?
No.
No? Okay.
No. I would expect that some of the... I think I had an uncle that was in Korea, I think, just kind of at the tail end of it. But and we never talked about it because he stayed on active duty and passed away while on active duty, and I had little remembrance of conversation with him.
Okay. So this has to do with both going to school and just news and being aware of the world. What was it like growing up during the Cold War? Did that have any big effect on your life?
No, I can't say that it really did. The Cold War existed, but I don't recall it ever being a topic of discussion as such.
Did you ever have any classes in school, fallout drills, anything like that?
Oh, I think we probably did. First of all, there was little risk to the world in the school that I went through. I went through a one-room school. I was the only one in my grade for 7 of the 8 years.
Wow.
There was no more than 13 of us in the building at any given time.
Okay.
So there was myself, my sister had somebody else in a class with her. One of my brothers had 2 people in his class, and the twins, I think, had 1 in theirs. And my young sister never went to that school, but that school was only open for like 9 or 10 years. And then we had to commute to Williston, which was 20 miles away. And all my high school was there in Williston. So I drove to school when I was a rare bird in that time frame where I had my own driver's license when I was a freshman in high school.
Oh, wow.
And so I drove the 20 miles to school and back home and played and did football practice and all that stuff, and that's what I did.
Nice. What was your favorite thing to study in school?
Well, I don't know if it was favorite, but it was required. When I was, my father made it very clear that when I went to high school, that I was going to take 4 years of science and 4 years of math, and that was the end of that discussion. And I did that.
Okay.
And so I would say that math and science were probably the two subjects that I was probably into the most. English then, as now, was not one of my favorite topics. And social studies really didn't turn me on a great deal at that time. If I recall correctly, I took wood shop and metal shop, and I had fun with those two classes. But that's, I would say that my relationship with math, science, and football was probably, and wrestling were probably the two areas that turned me on the most.
And then, yeah, you said you played football and you wrestled all through high school.
Yes.
Anything else extracurricular for fun?
Well, I can't really say that there. Can't really identify anything for fun per se. I mean, I've always been pretty much self-sufficient when it comes to those, keeping myself entertained as such. And then when you got a family the size that we had, well, it kept us occupied, shall we say.
Yeah. Both of my parents are the youngest of 5, so we grew up with big families.
You get it.
Yeah.
You get it. Absolutely.
Did you have a job at all growing up, or was the family and the farm a full-time job?
Well, I worked outside the home from the time I was about 12 or 13 years old.
Oh, okay.
We had a farm, but we lived on a farm, raised cattle, raised sheep, raised varying levels of livestock. But there were 2 or 3 neighbors around that seemed like they always needed help, and it seemed like I was always the guy that was hired. So that was before the child labor laws came in and so on. And it was not uncommon for in the summertime for me to be gone, well, not gone as such. I would leave in the morning, bright and early in the morning. Somebody would drop me off and they'd bring me home at night. And I may work 8, 10, 12-hour days on a farm someplace.
Okay.
So I did that pretty much all of my high school, all the way through high school, certainly.
Okay. What do you remember about JFK's assassination?
Choir. I was in the high school choir. I remember very specifically sitting. We had just started our session about 1 o'clock in the afternoon thereabouts when they made the announcement that the president had been assassinated. I remember I was sitting next to a guy by the name of David Buckley, who later came into the military, and I ran another story. I ran across him in Vietnam. But I remember very, very distinctly sitting there listening to that whole evolution as it was discussed on the radio, and we stayed right there until it was over with. And I remember our choir director was a guy by the name of Don Larson, saying, almost with tears in his eyes, saying, "Folks, we don't have a president."
Wow.
And that whole era I recall very, very distinctly, where I was sitting. There are a few things in life that you remember distinctly, and that's one of them.
Yeah, for every generation, I think, has those moments where it's just
Indeed.
You remember exactly where you were.
Yes, indeed.
So, you remember JFK's assassination pretty clearly. When did you first start to become aware of the conflict going on in Vietnam?
The conflict in Vietnam started in 1965 as such, and that was the same year that I graduated from high school. I can't really say that I paid much attention to it. And I certainly didn't pay attention to it very much during my 2 years of college. My 2 years of college was in a junior college right there in Williston, University of North Dakota. Williston Center is where it was. And I can't really say that any of us that were in the group that I ran with spent a great deal of time discussing it. I don't ever remember the subject coming up, quite frankly.
Okay. And so, because it's so early in the war, none of you guys are concerned
Indeed.
about the draft at this point?
Well, my draft, I registered for the draft, of course. And I don't even remember what my number was, because that wasn't a driving issue either. That had nothing to do with my coming into the military. Where I was in the draft was no bearing whatsoever.
Okay.
None whatsoever.
All right. And so, so like you said, you started 2 years of college. What were you studying in college for those 2 years?
I was doing what I was told. That is 4 years of science, 4 years of math. Now let's take some more science and math. So I took a lot of math. The two primary was biology, which was the subject that I enjoyed the most of the science classes. And I think I took 2 or maybe 4 semesters of biology. And, later on in life, I discovered that probably wasn't the smartest thing I ever did, but it was still something that I did. And it got me 50 some hours of total, with all the other subjects that I took while I was there at the college. Essentially, at the end of that 2 year period of time, I was paying my own way. I remember very distinctly. It was in February of 1967, and I remember walking down the street. I was in front of the post office. There was a sign in front that said, "The Navy wants you," and I says to myself, I wonder. So I made a left turn and went inside, and found the Navy recruiter. Turns out he was I did not know that at the time, but I found out later, he was an aviation bosun mate chief by the name of Luther McAllister. And basically what he said was, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I really don't know, don't have any idea." And he said, "Well, I can't take you now anyway. You're number 9 on the list. And I probably couldn't do anything with you for another 2 or 3 months." And I said, "Okay." So I went back to school, and about a week later, I get a note from him that said, "Come on down and see me." So I went on down to see him, and he said, "When do you want to go?" I said, "What happened to this summer?" He said, "The 8 guys that were ahead of you," he said, "have all failed their physicals or for whatever reason can't." He says, "And if you want to go, we can ship you." So we worked out a program where I was going to be going into what was called the Cache program, which is basically a reserve program at the time, where I would basically enlist for a period of time and not go until July.
Okay.
So for the first time in my life, I got on a train, and it took me a train from Williston, North Dakota to Fargo, where I stayed in the Bison Hotel in Fargo, North Dakota. And I found a piece of paper within the last few days or so of the allowance that I received for breakfast and for lunch and so on and so forth. Went down and enlisted, took my physical, and then went back home, and I was due to ship in July. So I go home, finish off the remainder semester of school, and once that was concluded, I got all the notes and the orders and all this other kind of stuff. I left Williston, North Dakota on the 5th of July and rode the train from there back to Fargo, where I was supposed to go from Fargo to San Diego for boot camp. And I remember someone sticking their head in the room and saying, "I want the following individuals, 1, 2, 3, 4, and my name was one of them. And we all got up and walked over to where he was, and he said, "Your orders are changed, you're going to Great Lakes."
Okay.
So we got on a train in Fargo, took the train to Chicago, downtown here to the main station, and then got on the Chicago Northwestern and took that back up to Great Lakes. And interesting, there was a sign that says the Navy starts here at Camp Barry. That's where that's where my Navy career as such started. And it was interesting that I had an opportunity to talk to my father and to my uncle. And both of them had remembered seeing that sign, the Navy starts here. And that sign was there up until probably 10 or 15 years ago. That same sign stood right there by Camp Barry. It was kind of interesting.
Wow, that's cool.
So then going through that whole process and coming into boot camp in July, I think the 5th or 6th, something along that line of 1967. Having been in the choir in high school, I had heard that there was a special unit. You hear this stuff.
Yeah.
And so I said, what do I got to do? And so I tried out for the Blue Jackets choir. And the gentleman who was the director was a guy by the name of Ed Sondager. And he had come from someplace up in Minnesota, I think Bemidji or somewhere up in that area.
Yeah.
Mankato or whatever, someplace up in that area. And we chatted for a while, and I did my practice singing and so on. I couldn't read a note then, still can't, but I could tell if they were going up or going down. And I had a pretty good ear for it. Once I heard it, I had it. And so I got into the Blue Jackets choir. And the Blue Jackets choir, basically what we did was every weekend when the folks were when the companies were going to be graduating, we would sing 3 or 4 whatever at the graduation, and then march on back over to Recruit Training Command. And I got an extra week of boot camp as a result of that. But probably the highlight of that whole process was we had the opportunity to sing the national anthem in Soldier Field for the what was called the college. All of the first, second round draft choices from all of the NFL teams played against the Chicago Bears in Soldier Field. Okay. And this would have been September-ish, somewhere in that area of 1968.
Okay.
And Gale Sayers was one of the ball players. I do not recall if he was on the I don't think that was during his draft year. I think he was already on the Bears at the time. And I recall in the end zone, and then we moved on up into the seats and watched the football game. It was quite impressive. I'd never been to a pro game before in my life of any way, shape, or form, and it was quite an experience.
Wow.
So that was the beginning there, shall we say?
I was gonna ask, backing up to when you were in North Dakota still, right after you joined, did you consult with your family at all about this? Did they have any opinion on you joining, or?
Well, the reality was I was pretty much on my own at that time.
Okay.
I was paying my own way. I had a girlfriend, I had a car, insurance, and an apartment, and I was running out of money. And I really didn't have any idea about where I was going to go. This consultation with the chief was basically on my own. I told my folks that this is what I was thinking about doing. I don't recall my mother saying yes, no, or nothing. I don't recall my father saying one way or the other. I do know, I'm sure that my mother had some thoughts about it, but she didn't really. My mother was a pretty self-sufficient lady back in those days, and she still is to this day. She understands that people got to learn to stand on their own 2 feet, and that's pretty much what she was allowing me to do.
Okay. Did your father have any advice for you when you joined?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. And And this is a fun question I always like to ask. What made you choose your MOS, the job you picked?
Well, part of it was my grandfather, because I was a pretty handy individual. I could do varying different types of things, and I guess the fact that the Vietnam War was going on at that particular point in time, there was a need for a hospital corpsman. I didn't know that. I had no clue about that kind of stuff. But I did know what a hospital looked like, and I had been in a hospital. And so they started rattling off varying different types of possibility, and they mentioned hospital. I said, well, that sounds cool, and that's what happened.
Okay.
So I can't really say that I was that any particular thing drove me, other than the fact that I knew what a hospital was, and that's pretty much the end of that.
Yeah.
Okay, I had to do with biology, and that can't be all bad. So that's kind of where I went.
You'd had 4 semesters of it in college.
Yeah, absolutely,
It's like, yeah.
absolutely right. You bet.
Yeah, and I'm betting as a guy who grew up in northern Wisconsin, for a farm boy from North Dakota, they start listing off all these Navy jobs, and you're like, I don't know what that is.
Precisely.
Hospital. I know what that is.
Exactly right. And that's pretty much where I was at that point. I did not know at the time what some of the varying scores meant that we took, but I was told that the scores that I had could get me in any school in the Navy that I wished to go to. Hospital corpsman happened to be the one that I chose. And in hindsight, that was the right decision.
Yeah.
In hindsight.
I was going to say, it worked out for you pretty well.
It worked out. It worked out.
What do you remember about those first couple of days of showing up at Great Lakes?
Scared to death. I was I'd been on my own a little bit, and I was 20 years old at the time. So it wasn't like it was a matter of, like a 18-year-old kid just coming out of high school and the next thing you know, I'm in the Navy. That wasn't the way it was. I had a few life experiences at that particular point in time. And a couple of years of college didn't hurt me. But now there I am going through boot camp. I got a lot of people yelling and screaming and so on and so on and so on and so forth. That was no big deal. I've been yelled and screamed at all my life, so big deal. I can't really say that there was any particular thing that was negative in any way, shape, or form, but the idea that I could start to assimilate with the group, if you will, I think that was fairly easy for me.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not sure that answers the question.
No,
but
I like that. Yeah. What did you think of your instructors?
The company commanders are the guys that are the ones that stand out the most, and the gentleman that was our company commander was a name of Howard W. Burkham, and he was in aviation something or another, first class. He reminded me a great deal of one of the teachers that I had in elementary school. He had light blue eyes, and he could literally look through you. He was a good company commander. In hindsight, he was a very good company commander. At that particular point in time, I thought he was a pain in the posterior, frankly. But nonetheless, he had something to do with making me one of the leaders of the company. I was the assistant master at arms, I think it was, and so myself and the master at arms, a guy by the name of Mike Galat out of Alabama, and we swapped watches in the morning every other for inspections and so on and so on and so on and so forth. Mike would do one day and I do the other day, and we'd take the watch from 8 o'clock in the morning until noon, so that meant that we only had to go to class half the time. And then the other half the time we were practicing for the choir. We both survived, both made it through boot camp. So,
And that's what's important. I was gonna ask. So being with the Blue Jacket Choir, did you have? I mean, obviously you had to practice, but did you kind of get like special treatment? Like, or not special treatment, but you guys would not have to do certain things because you'd have to go practice and maintain your uniforms.
We were in a
like
combination company. There was the Blue Jackets Choir, the company flags, the drill team, and the band. And there were sections of each one. And in our particular company, and then they'd form up another company next week with the same configuration of people, basically. So every 12 weeks, the Blue Jackets Choir was a whole new bunch of people. Okay, so we had some specials, as such. We had some routines that we had to do. We had some stuff that we did that was kind of funny. We had, as an example, I mentioned earlier, the one of coming to Chicago for the football game. Well, we had just done a show in the afternoon for graduation, and now we got on school buses. And we are changing out from one uniform to another uniform, and we're coming down the Edens Expressway changing clothes. So half of us would stand up against the windows on the outside the windows while the other half of us changed, and then we'd swap places. And coming down the Edens at 40, 45, 50, 60 miles an hour was an experience in itself, and none of us got spilled, and we did our show, and it was kind of... You couldn't do that today. I mean, that just would not happen today. I mean, you heaven forbid, you wouldn't want to get somebody out of a seatbelt and standing up on a bus or anything like that. But that's what we did, and we lived anyway.
I was gonna ask. So apart from that, you mentioned a few of them. Are there any other like incidents that really stand out from basic? For funny or not funny?
Well. Probably you have to make up your beds, your racks, and then as today I would end up with a headache every once in a while, and I ended up with a pretty good headache. And during lunchtime, chow time, afternoon chow, I went to the barracks, laid down on the floor. Propped myself up against my locker and went to sleep. And figuring my headache would maybe go away during lunch. And about that time, something hit me on the feet. My head went smacked against the locker. And the next thing you know, I was standing at straight up attention. And Howard W. Burkham had just kicked me sideways in the foot. And just about knocked me out. But that took care of the headache because I certainly wasn't concerned about the headache. All of a sudden I was in trouble for sleeping during the middle of the day. I understand it, I get it, all that stuff. But at the time it was scary, shall we say.
Oh yeah.
So and that's really the only. I did something else one time where I ended up going to what was referred to as happy hour. I don't remember what that was all about, but going down and exercising for an hour or so with your rifle. And that wasn't exactly my idea of a good time. I decided that I don't want to do that no more. So that was really the only things out of boot camp itself that it stands out as such.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. So after you graduated from boot camp, you went straight onto your
I went straight across the street to Hospital Corps School.
That's pretty funny, just right over there.
Well, I did it because I actually had a plan, and the plan was that I wanted to go home for Christmas.
Oh.
And I knew how much leave that I had, and I didn't want to burn it.
Yeah.
So I just went right straight across the street, graduated from boot camp on a Friday, and on Monday or that afternoon, I was at Hospital Corps School.
Oh, wow.
And we formed up a company. I think we started class like either the next Monday or a week out. I don't recall exactly, but there was about 70 some of us in that Hospital Corps School company, and that's where we went from there. Great. And that went until about the 20-something or another of January, last part of January of '68, is when I graduated from Corps School, but I had about a 10-day leave period where I took the train back to North Dakota and was there for Christmas, and then turned around and came back, finished off Corps School.
Okay, that's cool. It's nice that it's so close, because I've had friends who've gone through basic in one part of the country, and then it's all right, on to your next training, which is on the other side of the country.
Yes.
And then to your new duty post, which is halfway across the country.
Yes. I was very fortunate to be able to pull that off in that particular fashion. At the time, there were 2 hospital corps schools, one in San Diego and one at Great Lakes. And fortunately, I was able to roll right across the street to go right up to the next one.
Instead of all the way across
rather
the country.
than going to San Diego for, I mean, school to school, it would have been an experience, but just the same.
How did corps school compare to basic?
Well, it was a much more relaxed. The company commander there was a chief hospital corpsman by the name of Persino. He went on to become a medical service corps officer, so he was a pretty sharp hand, or that would not have happened with him. But there were a couple of things that happened in hospital corps school that were rather amusing. I almost got kicked out of school, as a matter of fact. We had to have pharmacy, anatomy and physiology, and all this other kind of stuff. And my buddy and I were conspiring as to how we could figure out how to survive the class without learning all these silly drugs, because if we needed them, we'd have to find them in a book anyway. And we did our absolute best not to get through that particular part. And we went before an academic review board, and the chief that was running the board said, "Listen, learn it, shut up, I don't want to see you back in here again, okay?" And that was the end of that. So Larry and I went back to where we were doing and say, yeah, we survived that. We both survived hospital corps school. I was on the morning, what was called the morning working party. And the morning working party was, after everybody else got up and left for breakfast, we'd have to tune up the barracks to make sure everything was all squared away. So we went to breakfast early, meaning like 5 o'clock in the morning, we'd go to breakfast.
Right.
And then we'd be back when the rest of the guys went to chow. Then we'd clean up the barracks and we'd go to class. So all's well in class. And at some point, I'm not absolutely sure what the occasion was, but somehow or another we managed to go to Chicago. All of us on the morning working party went to Chicago to watch the Bulls play the Baltimore Bullets in a basketball at the old stadium.
Okay.
And a couple of people in the group were 21, so of course we had a beer or 3. And we had one guy that couldn't go, so we stashed beer in our pea coats, rode the train back to Great Lakes, and then went and woke up our buddy and took him out in the back porch and proceeded to help him drink some beer because he'd missed out.
Oh, yeah.
Now you got to get rid of the beer bottles. And so we started to throw beer bottles into the ravine. They're probably still there. A few of us missed and hit a tree, but that tree stayed there. It was there 15 years ago, so I suppose it's probably about shot by now, but whatever. But those little things like that kind of lightened the mood a little bit, because we certainly weren't thinking about the possibility of any of us going with the Marines at that point. That really wasn't a major discussion. First aid was one of my favorite classes there. The guy that taught that class was a guy out of Colorado by the name of Chief Raymond. And Chief Raymond had a means about him that was phenomenal. He could lay on the floor, go in an absolutely, totally relaxed position and say, "We want you to be able to pick pick him up off the floor and get him up onto our shoulder in a fireman's carry and carry him out. And people were dropping him on the floor and so on and so forth, and he was all splattered on out. And finally I said, well, Chief, I think I can get you up. And so I got a hold of him and I jerked him up and I had him on my shoulder, and he said, you're only one of 4 or 5 guys that have ever been able to do that. He said, you were a wrestler, weren't you? I said, yes, I was. And he says, that's the only a wrestler has ever been able to lift him, because we understood leverage and all that stuff. I understand how to do that. But it was kind of an experience. You know, a fun part, if you will. And I mean, school wasn't that bad, but it was interesting. Concluding that in January, next stop was going to be the Naval Hospital, Portsmouth, Virginia. And I had applied for, because I had all these brains that I didn't know I had, I had applied for pharmacy school. So my next stop was supposed to be pharmacy school at Portsmouth, Virginia, but there was going to be about a 2-month wait first. So I was going on the staff of the Naval Hospital, Portsmouth. So that's what I did. And my first job was working in the operating room. And not as well, basically I was a patient chaser. I would go to the ward, bring the patient down, take the patient back after they came out of anesthesia and so on. And then when I wasn't there, I was back folding linen in the linen room to get that ready to go on in for surgery, the autoclaves and all that stuff. We did that for a period of time until about, May or so. And then I pulled a 30-day night shift. That's not 5 days on, 5 days off. That's 30 days. So I spent 30 days on a night shift during May, and I worked OB, as in obstetrics, gynecology, and pediatric admissions. So that's what I had to do when the patients come on in the middle of the night. I had to put all the paperwork together to get them into the ward. Had a situation happen during that time frame that was memorable, to say the least. Right about that same time, there had been a submarine that came from the Azores, was on its way back to Norfolk, Virginia, and hit a underground mountain someplace out in the middle and exploded or something, and it disappeared. It has never been heard from since. I think there's only been one piece of equipment that's ever been found from there. So one night I got this lady in who was very pregnant, and I'm typing up the paperwork, and you normally ask which command does your husband belong to and so on. And somebody leaned over my shoulder and said USS Scorpion was the ship, was the submarine. And I just proceeded to type that in. I didn't even ask the question, and so on and so on and so forth. Later on in life, it dawned on me that that little baby that was born that night was the child of somebody that was aboard that ship who would never know their father. And that has always been something that kind of keep in mind, that as we progress through life, you just never can tell when all of a sudden lights out. And it's that particular thing has stuck with me forever. Once we concluded that 30-day period of time, my next stop then was pharmacy school. And I lasted in pharmacy school about 2 weeks. I didn't like it at all. It was just, I just did not like that school. I was going to be in school for 9 months, and at the end of that 9-month period of time, I was going to have to know all there was to know about all very different types of drugs and so on and so on and so forth. And I just didn't do anything for me. After working the other area in the operating room and working at the administration side, I said, I don't want to do this. So I talked to my class leader, class company commander, and he said, well, I understand it's not for everybody. Let's run you through an academic review board. And I went down to see the master chief, and the master chief said, we'll have to run you through an ARB. So I went through an academic review board and went before the board, and the director of the school was also the chairman of the academic review board. And I forget his name right offhand, but it'll come to me later. But anyway, he basically said, boy, are you telling me you don't like my school? And I said, yes, sir, that's exactly what I'm saying. He said, we'll take care of you. And I said, yes, sir, I'm sure you will. 10 days later, I had orders to the 1st Marine Division. That was his means of taking care of you. So my next stop was Field Medical Service School at Camp Pendleton, California. And I was supposed to go from there to the 1st Marine Division in Vietnam. So
ouch.
I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit. I don't want to mess up your system here.
No, it's fine. You actually are answering a lot of my questions. I was just going to ask, so you kind of allude to this, but with Corps School, I'm assuming you got a little more time off because, like you said, you're able to go to the Bulls game.
Yeah.
Did you do it? You were close to Chicago, so did you go in Chicago much, or just hang out around base?
Yeah, I remember a few times. Basically, our weekends, we would come down to the city. There was one time where myself and a buddy of mine out of Michigan, whose name I can't remember either right offhand. I can see his face, not his name. I have an uncle that lives out west in Naperville, Lisle area, and we made connection with him, and he came and picked us up and took us down to his house, and we spent the day. And he's also a pilot. And he took us out to the Aurora airport and put us on an airplane and took us for a ride and proceeded to get me sick. Oh God, I was sick. And then took us back up to Great Lakes. It wasn't an overnighter. It was just a one day, a Saturday or a Sunday or whatever the case should be. So we were able to get away, but we never left for overnight. We always went back to the base at night because it was just during the day that we were allowed. Liberty was up at 8, 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or something like that.
But that's, nicer to get off.
Yeah.
And I think you already said, that you liked first aid. That was like your favorite part of Corps School?
Say that again.
First aid was your favorite part of
Corps School?
Absolutely.
First aid, yeah.
So you guys studied a little bit of everything in Corps School.
Oh, yes.
Okay. And then what was was pharmacology your least favorite, or was there something you really did?
I would say pharmacology was probably the one that I disliked the most.
Okay.
Yeah, that has been, pharmacy almost got me kicked out of hospital Corps School, and it certainly got figured out after I'd been in it a while. I don't want to do that.
Not for me. I gotta say, this is the one thing I was really wanting to ask about. You said working in the OR at the Naval Hospital, there were a lot of young Marines around, so you said you got some pretty interesting cases coming through the OR. I had to ask, were there a couple things that really stuck out in your mind for?
Yes. One of the things that struck me, the buddy of mine that almost got kicked out of Corps School at the same time I did happened to go to Portsmouth at the same time. Only Larry ended up working on the urology ward.
Okay.
And of course, combat injuries is something that I didn't really register as such. Okay. One instance, we went up and somebody was up there hollering about something, and he needed his meds. And Larry said, "Yeah, he's due for his morphine. You can tell time by that guy. When 4 hours is up, give him another shot of morphine." Now, whether or not the guy was addicted to a morphine on the ward, I don't know the answer. But it just seemed that, killing pain was a big issue, of course. The other thing, I remember going up on a ward one night, bringing a guy down who had, he was a civilian employee who had fallen off on a ladder and had an impacted fracture of his ankle.
Ugh.
And so they took him down to the OR and pulled things back and pinned him up and so on and so forth and put the cast on him and sent him back on up. And I took him back up to the ward. And about a week later, I went up and got him again. I brought him back down. His leg was all black and blue.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed that when they put the cast on down in the OR, they'd put it on too tight.
Ugh.
And it had a constriction around here. And we go on back downstairs, and I happened to take him into the OR, and I was waiting outside looking through the window. And one of the orthopedic surgeons was standing next to me watching, and I said, it's too bad that had to happen. And he said, well, yeah, but you know, he'd probably be better off this way. I said, huh? Why do you say that? He said, because with a prosthesis, he'll be up and around in about 6 weeks. He said, with that ankle banged up, he'd be 6 months before he'd be back to work. I said, really?
Uh-huh.
Well, that ended that conversation. I figured I had some words that I would have shared with you, but with him, but I decided I wouldn't do that at that point. Okay, it was just a situation where it was just kind of cold-blooded. I think it would be what you would say. Okay,
yeah.
And later on, I get it. I understand what he was saying, but that wouldn't happen today.
No.
That would not happen today. There's no way. First of all, it wouldn't have been, the constriction wouldn't have been, it would have been identified sooner.
Oh, yeah.
But there was a lot of things that we missed because of lack of technology, lack of paying attention, just any number of things. I mean, it just happens.
It's different time. So you also talked about noticing with a friend of yours the the segregation in the Navy at this point.
Segregation, as such?
Yeah. Just I was gonna ask more about like segregation of rank.
Certainly.
I phrased that wrong. So, because you already made third at this point.
I made third class in April the 16th of '68.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about segregation of just the segregation of rank.
Well, to some degree, but the hospital corps was always an unusual, or even then and today, is an unusual situation where you have hospital corpsmen that are trained to do certain things. They're working right next to a nurse who may be a lieutenant JG, whatever the case should be, maybe about the same age as the hospital corpsman, and you're sitting in there with working in the intensive care unit or working whatever right next to this individual. You're the same age.
Yeah.
And then after that's all over with, now you go on out and have a beer. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now that is a little different than today, in that particular time it was not unusual at all for the nurses and the hospital corpsmen to go on off someplace and go to a bar and have a beer, or meet up someplace, whatever. I mean, and the majority of the nurses were female, majority of the hospital corpsmen were male. Mm-hmm. There were a few female hospital corpsmen. There was only 9 in my hospital corps company. So there was a certain break, if you will, that let's face it, we've been trying for 45 years that I know of to keep the sailors and the officers separated. We haven't been successful yet. Not totally. I mean, to some degree. It was kind of interesting that many years later, I was on a reserve 2-week active duty, and I was in Naval Hospital, Great Lakes, and I was the master chief at the time. And I went in, was sitting there talking to the captain, who was a medical service corps officer, and he says, "So what the hell happened, Master Chief? Did you marry a nurse?" And I just laughed because, believe it or not, that was one of the ways that it seemed was the way to eliminate that possibility of fraternization, was send him to Vietnam. Maybe he'll get killed. That'll take care of that problem. So fraternization as such was an issue, but it wasn't something that was it wasn't something that that we were beat upon a lot. I mean, the higher ups were not always coming to us and say, you can't talk to that nurse, you can't do whatever the case should be. We rarely heard that stuff.
Okay.
You know, it may have been there, but I certainly don't remember it. Okay.
All right.
I'm not sure that
No,
that follow that makes
yeah,
sense.
because it and I'm sure that and what you said definitely makes a lot of sense with, you know, because you're working with these officers, but you know you have to have a working relationship.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's different if you're on ship and where it's like, you know, you work for me.
Yes.
So I give orders, you carry them out. Whereas in the hospital, it's you work with me.
There's a with. Yes,
yeah.
absolutely right.
And when you're a you know, a chief, or especially when you hit chief, and if you're still doing that and you're working with some young ensign or lieutenant junior grade, it's like you could do my job.
Absolutely.
Because it's like you may not,
Absolutely.
you know, it's like I may be a doctor, but you have 15 or 20 odd years of experience in the wards. It's
Absolutely.
like, that's far more valuable.
Absolutely.
So, okay. So you get your orders to head off to Pendleton as a, you know, to go train with the Marines. Did you even know that was a possibility that you would end up with the Marines?
Never thought about it.
Okay.
Never. And I can't say that I ever really thought about it.
Okay.
When the reality hit that I was going to Field Medical Service School and for further transfer to the 1st Marine Division, it was a shock, needless to say.
Yeah.
When the orders came in, I flew from Portsmouth, Virginia, second time I ever been on an airplane. Flew from Portsmouth, Virginia, or Norfolk as such, to Minneapolis. Spent the night with my aunt and uncle in Cannon Falls, Minnesota. And the next day they took me to the train, and I took the train from there back to Williston, North Dakota. In the same set of whites that would salute you by the time we got home, because the whites were just a horrid uniform. Then and as now. But anyway, basically I said I really did not really think in terms of dying, but I did realize that, you know, there's a possibility I'm going into a combat. So we went from there after 2 weeks, and we went to Camp Pendleton, California. Field Med Service School was 4 weeks long, and about 3 weeks into the course, here comes a set of orders changed to my orders that I was not going to the 1st Marine Division. I was going to the 5th Marine Division at Camp Pendleton, California.
Okay.
And there I was, a 3rd class with 4 or 5 months as a 3rd, thereabouts. And so I'd been in the Navy just a touch over a year. And here I am running around with a 3rd class stripe on. So needless to say that left me in a situation where I'm promoted beyond my ability at that point. And getting changed from there to the 1st Battalion, 28th Marines. I went to the headquarters for 128, and 128 then assigned me to Charlie Company, where I was the quote-unquote senior hospital corpsman in the company. There was myself and 7 other guys, and they were all HNs or E2s, E3s.
Okay.
All of them had been in the Navy anywhere from 2 to 3 years, and there I am with just a touch more than a year. So from a leadership perspective, yes, I got the rank, but no, I don't have the experience, similar to what we talked about a while ago. My main function was to try to keep people busy and hid. Once in a while, I would have a guy or a couple of the guys that were married and living off out in town, and they would come on in the morning, and they'd muster them and go to lunch and see you tomorrow. And then whenever we have an operation going on where we're going to go on out and do some drilling, whatever, wherever we were going to do, then we would need all guys and so on and so forth, and that's what we did. we'd run our sick call within the company and refer those out that we needed to refer out and take care of the records and do that kind of stuff. But for the most part, the chief that was running the battalion pretty much let me run my own show and stayed out of the way for the most part.
Okay.
And I worked with the guys reasonably well. And we did the best we could to have as good a time as we could while we were doing it. Okay. So, and that lasted for, I don't recall exactly how long I was with Charlie 128, probably in the neighborhood of about 6 months or so, thereabouts. And then I got called back one day for interview, and I was supposed to go to work for, they were going to ship me from there to headquarters 28th Marines, where the Marine Regiment. And I was going to be dealing with the sick call and the records of the headquarters company.
Okay.
And so that's basically what I did from then until the time I got orders to go to Vietnam.
Okay. One thing I'm really curious about is just how was the adjustment to being in the Marine Corps?
I think I adjusted to that reasonably well. I went with the Marine Corps uniform, so I went Marine Corps uniform, Marine Corps regulations, and so on, and tried to become part of the troops, part of the guys. I got along very well with the Marines that I worked with. We had, there was a couple of minor little issues here and there, but in general terms, I think the adjustment for me was reasonably easy, because, and I mean, again, it's a matter of adjust. You got no choice. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So I adjusted, I think, pretty well.
Good. What was field medical service training like?
It has changed a lot today from what it was at that particular point in time. The primary thing that we needed to learn at that time was how Marines think.
Okay.
And that our job is first aid. Our job is keeping as many men and as many guns for a longer period as possible. We learned briefly about how to build a relationship between the Marines and the Navy and the hospital corpsmen. And over the years, I've discovered that has been extremely important, because a Marine hospital corpsman is a whole different psyche than normal hospital corpsmen.
Okay.
You'll find people that are, and I'm sure you've interviewed others that were Navy hospital corpsmen, FMF types, and they got a little different way of thinking than does the regular fleet type hospital corpsman. You're right on out there with the stuff. I mean, you're packing the armor, and you're doing whatever's got to be done to get the job done. It is not just a matter of, wait a minute, I'm a doc, I don't have to do that. You do that stuff very long, and you'll find yourself dead.
Yeah. No, the gentleman I was working with, who was providing me with extra questions for you, he's FMF. He spent 9 fun months in Ramadi with the Marines.
Then you know,
he did.
Yes.
He was doing the full deal, on patrol, full battle rattle, same thing as the Marines.
You bet. You bet.
So.
And that's just the way. Well, one of the things that we learned in field med school was that hospital corpsmen were usually the second or third one that's going to get shot. Okay? The first one that's going to get shot is the radioman. The second one's going to get shot is the hospital corpsman. And the third one's going to get shot is anybody wearing a 45. And so that was the whole idea of it, is wipe out your communication, wipe out your morale guys. That would be me. Yeah. And then knock out the leadership. And that was the theory, and it still is to some degree. Yeah. And in fact, many times when I would be on an operation, I'd just carry the radio. I figured, what the hell, if I'm going to be the first guy shot or second guy shot, I might as well be first and second all at once. I mean, that's kind of a silly way to look at it, but that's what I basically did.
Might as well take the risk off one guy and put it
Absolutely.
on.
Got one more guy to survive with an M16, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Had any of the Marines, or the more importantly the corpsmen training you, had any of them been to Vietnam?
I believe so. I think that the sergeant that was running, or staff sergeant, I think it was, that was running our unit at Field Med School, I'm pretty sure he was a combat veteran. All of the hospital corpsmen that were teaching were combat veterans.
Okay.
And realized that this was in 68, so many of them had been in Vietnam at 65 time frame, 65, 66, and rolled out.
Yeah.
And now they were put into an instructional position. So I would say the majority of them had been in combat, yes.
Okay. Once you got through field medical school and you start doing more field exercises and training with the Marines, especially once you found out you were deploying, what was the main focus of that training? Was it a lot of guerrilla counterinsurgency, jungle operations?
I don't ever recall ever having any jungle operations per se. I really, it seemed to me like the main emphasis was twofold. First of all, keep them busy. Second of all, if you're going out on a range or you're going to go doing an operation, an operational sweeps, whatever, that's more in the era of the traditional combat situation that we learned, that the Marines learned in World War II, Korea, and so on, where everybody's on a line and you're all going out away, you know. I don't ever recall ever going through any guerrilla operations or, you know, house search and destroys or anything along that line. I don't ever recall doing that in in field med school at that time.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sure it changed. I know it changed, but it not for us.
Okay. All right. So you guys were still.
We had four companies of hospital corpsmen of about 70, 80 people in each company. And frankly, the whole goal with this was about the time of the Tet Offensive.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, it was saddle up because you boys are going across the pond.
I was about to ask, that was my next question, was what do you remember about Tet and the reaction of the Marines to Tet?
I really didn't, that really did not register. I don't ever recall that actually registering that was why. I think the 10th Offensive was going on initially with the orders to go to the 1st Division. The reason it was changed because it simmered down a little bit and it wasn't quite as big a need, okay? We sat at Camp Pendleton, or I sat at Camp Pendleton for 22, 23 months. Rumor had it nobody else was going to Vietnam.
Okay.
A week later I got orders. 138 of us were scheduled to go over at the same time, and it is my understanding that all but one came back.
Okay.
That's my understanding. Some of them come back with hearts, Purple Hearts, but I think everybody else came back. That's what I heard. I don't know that for sure.
Okay. So I just got to ask, so you spent a while there. When you weren't training, what were you doing for fun?
Oh boy, there were bars and bars and bars. Frankly, I was in a situation where I think I started to develop a bit of an alcohol problem. I would get off work at 4 in the afternoon, and we'd go to town. And we had one particular place in San Clemente that we would go. We'd get a steak, baked potato, and a beer for a couple bucks. And then we go across the street and play pool, and we play pool for beer, and we do that until they closed, and then we go back to the back and sleep it off and go to work the next morning, and that's the way it went. I mean, it was pretty much an ongoing thing, and except on weekends, of course. And weekends we went and started drinking at 9 o'clock in the morning, or we, varying things. I recall one time there was 6 or 7 of us, 6 of us, I guess. My car. Yeah, my car. We're going to go watch a football game in San Diego. And a buddy of mine had a friend who was a running back at the time was the Baltimore Colts. And the Colts were supposed to be playing in San Diego, and he said, we can get in. Yeah, okay, sure. So we put a couple cases of beer in a cooler in the back of my car, and down the road we went.
Yeah.
And just about the time we're going to pull into the stadium, we hear on the radio that if you don't have tickets, forget it, you're not going to get in.
Mm-hmm.
So I swung out into main traffic, and I moved about 1.5 miles, and my car quit in the middle of 5 lanes of traffic.
Oh.
So there's only one thing to do in a case like that, and that's open another beer,
Yeah.
which we did.
Mm-hmm.
And about that time, I see lights and behind me,
Yeah.
and that turned out to be a state trooper
Mm-hmm.
who pulled up behind us, California Highway Patrol, and they had a big old cow catcher on the back, on the
Yeah.
front of their car. And he just got up behind me and pushed me off the side of the road and saluted, and drove on down the road, left us sit there.
Uh-huh.
So we finally figured out get a fan belt or some such thing and got the car going, and home we went. That was one weekend that we survived.
Mm-hmm.
And another time we made a trip from San Clemente to Lodi, California, way north, way up around San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And we were going to go see that same football team against the 49ers, and we couldn't get in. We did get in. We didn't get in to see the Niners.
Okay.
We did get into the football field. And then came back the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty long drive from
Yeah.
1 to 1. That's a good day's drive. And we made the trip up and back, and we were back and ready to go to work on Monday morning.
That's awesome.
So it was those are 2 or 3 different issues that that we pulled off that I don't know that I'd necessarily do it today,
Mm-hmm.
but at the time, why not?
You figure you're going to Vietnam and young,
Precisely.
and got money, so.
Precisely. I got wheels and you got money, and we're ready to go. No problem.
Buddy of mine, who I met in college, he's a bit older than me. He was in the 82nd Airborne before he started college, and he said that his regiment was the highest functioning alcoholics in the Army.
I could believe it.
Because the PX sold the most alcohol at their duty station than any other PX in the country. But they had some of the best PT scores, some of the best officer reviews,
Absolutely.
some of the best NCO reviews, and so
Absolutely.
It
Absolutely.
didn't matter that every Monday morning at PT
Absolutely.
you walked by the formation and it was just like,
Yes.
why does this formation smell like a bar? But 5 mile run later, everyone's fine. It's like,
Absolutely.
all right, who cares?
You bet. You bet. No question about it.
So so you get the news that you guys are being sent to Vietnam. Had you been expecting this, or?
Not really. We were most of us had about a year or so to go in the Navy at the time.
Mm-hmm.
There was 138 of us, so we all got our orders at about the same time. So we went back to our respective homes and said our goodbyes as such. And then all gathered at Travis Air Force Base in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And we showed up, I don't know, 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and the Air Force guys say, "Who are you guys?" And we don't have you manifested on a flight. So here come some buses, and they hauled us to Treasure Island.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at Treasure Island for like 3 days. And then they put us on the buses again and took us to San Bernardino, California, where we flew out of San Bernardino. And it was wheels up at 6 o'clock in the morning, so we rode the bus all night.
Mm-hmm.
Got on the plane the next morning at 6, and we were up on our way to Anchorage, Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
Refueled in Anchorage, flew from there to Okinawa, stayed 12 hours in Okinawa, and the next stop is Da Nang.
Wow.
So,
What was your family's reaction to you being deployed?
my family, my brothers and sisters and mother and dad were not necessarily super emotional types.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that there was some emotion going on, knowing that I was going to Vietnam, and I think they knew enough about what was going on that there was a reasonably decent chance that I was going to get killed
Mm-hmm.
Or injured. But I don't recall any major emotional outbursts and so on and so forth, other than take care of yourself.
Okay.
That's about it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a similar reaction. It was about that same time or a few months prior to that I met this young lady, and we had decided that we were going to get married, but we were not going to get married until after I got back from Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
My wife's father had been in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
He spent 4 years in the Pacific.
Okay.
And my mother-in-law was literally by herself for that 4-year period of time. Only communication was via letter.
Yeah.
That was it. And so I'm sure that there was a little bit different emotion going on there, but we never really talked a great deal about that as such. I wasn't terribly interested in getting into any emotional situation at that point in time. How am I going to get through this thing?
Yeah.
You know, that was more what I was thinking in terms of. Okay.
Okay.
I was a third class at the time. I was selected for second. So there was a reasonably decent chance that I could end up in a decent job, maybe. And as it turned out, I did for a little while. But as far as any emotional, as such, there wasn't much of it.
Okay.
Not much of it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you have a child in the military around Vietnam, you're seeing this happen, so it's kind of one of those, you don't want it to happen, but it's not a huge surprise.
Exactly.
So, all right. Did your training change at all when you were getting ready to go to Vietnam?
No.
No? Okay.
No. I was with the headquarters 28th Marines during that entire time frame, right up until the time I got orders. I was doing my thing, taking care of the records, taking care of sick call for the unit. I just keep marching on, doing the thing.
Okay. So, what was your initial reaction to landing in Da Nang?
It was interesting. First of all, the trip from San Bernardino to Anchorage, from Anchorage to Okinawa, was party time. Okay?
Yeah.
It was just one thing right after another. We were on Tiger Airlines. The crew that was taking us in they were just cool about the whole thing, and we were fine. Now, we had to have a 12-hour layover in Okinawa, so it was a very quick sleepover and pick up your toys the next morning and you're rolling. The same crew took us in. The crew was totally different mentality the next morning. We were all... I really think the majority of us were concerned about we're going to get blown up coming in. Okay? What's going to happen here? What's going to happen? We're going to start getting mortar rounds or whatever when we hit the airport. We had no idea. It was quiet. We were all of a sudden, it's showtime, boys and girls. Just pay attention.
Yeah.
Okay. Of course, we didn't get blown up when we landed. They took us all, put us on a deuce and a half, several of them, and hauled us up to the division surgeon's office where they dispersed us out to the varying spots. Myself and 4 or 5 other guys got sent out to 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. And it just so happened that when we walked into the battalion headquarters of Battalion 8 station at 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, the guy that was the chief of that unit had had known at Camp Pendleton. A guy by the name of Chief Fraser.
Okay.
And when Chief Fraser saw me come in the door, he says, "Oh, I got a job for you." And he took me off to the side, and I put on second class the day I got in country, which is the 30th of June or whatever it was. I guess when looking at my records, I think my pay entry base date was the 1st of June, but whatever. They were supposed to have a battalion inspection of some type, and he says, "I got 5,000 health records over there. I need to make sure they're right." He says, "If I remember you know something about health records," he says, "that's your job." So for the next probably 3 weeks, I was spending 12 and 14 hours a day. I'd go until I couldn't go anymore, and go back, get a bite to eat, and get some sleep, and then go back in there and tear into those records some more. And just straightening out paperwork, because that's what happens. Paperwork gets scrambled, and that's what I did. And I worked that process for about maybe 3 weeks or so, and we passed the inspection. And the chief said, "I'd like to keep you back here." He says, "But in all fairness, I can't."
Mm.
I got to send you to the bush. And I got a unit I think would be just right for you. And that's when I got transferred to my company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, Cup Squad.
All right.
Now, I probably told you a little bit about that,
Yeah,
you probably read through that.
I
so
read through that bio
I don't want to. I don't want to get ahead or behind on here. So
No, actually, that was good. Yeah. The only thing I was just gonna ask was, so, what was the getting assigned to units? What was the process of that like? Did you once you guys first showed up? They just you said they packed you all onto the trucks and then they drive you. Like
I think Division had a pretty good idea where people were going when you walked in the door. I think it was but they they got to do a head count,
Right.
and this unit needs 10 people, and this guy needs 5 people, and this needs 6 people, and this needs whatever the case should be, and they sorted us all out. There were a portion of the people of that 138 that were going to First Force Service Group, which was the hospital as such, the transit, the hospital. It's not really, how to explain. In a battalional in a combat situation, you got your hospital corpsman with a company. They refer back to the battalion aid station, who may refer back to the regimental aid station, who in turn send them to the field hospital. The field hospital was handled by Force Service Group. There was a certain level of triage that went on with the patients someplace in that line, where some of them went in there knowing that they were going to be there for maybe just a patch up as such. Maybe they got a bullet hole in them and patch them up, and they're going to be back on the line in a few days.
Yeah.
And others that were more seriously injured are going to get medevaced off to go to the hospital ship. Those are generally people that were coming back to the States. They probably were not going to return.
Yeah.
And some of those that were going into the hospital, to the hospital company, were dying. Literally. And so we knew very well, or at least the people that are doing the triage there knew very well, that not all of those folks are going to come out the other side walking. They're going to be carried out.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a tough business.
Yeah.
Tough business as such. But as far as the sorting of us, I'm guessing that probably about half of that 138 of us, give or take, probably 60 of us or so, were dispersed on out to First Marines, 5th Marines, and 3rd Marines, and some to the 9th Marines. And my 9th Marines were artillery.
Okay.
So some went to the artillery units, but the majority of them went to line companies.
Right. Because they need medics. So.
That's where we were, yeah.
All right. So that's when you end up getting assigned to the Combat Unit Pacification Program. What'd you think of that unit? And that assignment, moreover.
Well, the chief made it pretty clear that he thought that this was going to be a good unit for me. There was myself and 16, 17 Marines. The squad leader was a corporal, E4. I was an E5. I didn't really know for sure what I was walking into. It was interesting when we came off the hill. We were working off an area in a village called Anwa, or an area called Anwa. And it was interesting that the Vietnamese immediately identified me as a hospital corpsman. Even though I was in military regs, or in Marine Corps regs, they knew right away that I was a hospital corpsman.
Okay.
Bakshi. That was the term for a hospital corpsman, for village, for doctor. And now, granted, I went out with a little bit more gear because I kind of knew what I was walking into, sort of, kind of, but not a lot, And so it was kind of an interesting little reaction, okay? Basically what we did, we'd be in an area here, we'd be there for 2-3 days. We moved down the road 2-3, maybe a mile or two, and set up there. We'd be there for 2-3 more days, and we moved to another spot. We'd be there for 2-3 days, and we moved back to the place we were before. So we make that cycle probably every 10 days, 2 weeks, somewhere in that area. Okay, and I would be up majority of the night because of night patrols and so on and so forth. We fortunately only had contact twice, but you never know when it's going to happen. And I'm usually the last guy on the radio, probably from 4 o'clock in the morning until daylight. I had the radio watch normally. Then I'd start running sick calls as soon as daylight goes, and I would have anywhere from 75 to 150 people that would want to see me for a lot of stuff just because they want to be in contact with an American. I don't think it had anything to do with them being real sick as such, but you know, they had sores and stuff, you know, belly aches and who knows what.
Yeah.
And it was during that time frame when 2 little boys, about 12, 13 years old, come to me one day and said, "Bakshi, you show us what you do." And I said, "Excuse me? Try that again." And we can do what you do. And so I basically showed those 2 boys how to put on bandages and how to do that kind of stuff. And they spoke the language, so it was much easier for them. So I would be propped over against a tree having a cigarette and a cup of coffee, and the kids would run sick call. Anytime they got something they didn't know quite what to do with, "Bakshi, come look." And that's the way that went. And it was just every day we would have 75 to 150 people. I wish I'd have kept count because I never really paid much attention to it until later on. You know, it was just a matter of there people just seemed like they're lined up forever. And we're doing the best we can. And we're passing out. Everybody got something. If they came to see me, they got something. It may be no more than a piece of sodium bicarb and charcoal pill, you know. And I would get them by the jug, you know, and I'd pass them things out a couple, 2, 3 at a time, and they'd come back tomorrow for the same problem. But and it was just a matter of, I think it was more a matter of being in contact with me.
Okay.
I think that's what it was. And it was quite that was an experience in itself. That's why it was called Combined Unit Pacification Program, and it was like there was an old program that the Army used called CAPS, and I remember what CAP meant, but it was similar to that. So we would be on out there seeing the people, relating with the people.
Wow.
So that's what I did.
That's neat. What were some of the main problems that these people were having that you were having to treat?
Infectious sores was a primary problem. There were probably a few that had some shrapnel wounds of varying types. Not very many, but the majority of it was flies and mosquitoes. You get a mosquito bite, the kid starts to rub it. They start to rub it and itch it. Now all of a sudden you got a sore. Now a fly comes and lands on there, and there you go. And you end up with you'd end up with sores that were probably 2-3 inches across in some cases, usually on their legs or on their arms, more often than not, because that's what they're scratching and itching and so on. And so we get a whole bunch of put some ointment on it and put a wrap on it, and hopefully you get it going the opposite direction. But that's the kind of stuff you'd see every day.
Okay. How did the locals react to your unit? I mean, obviously they really liked you, but how did they feel about
They got along okay with the Marines too, because the Marines got along with the folks for the most part.
Okay.
We had a couple of Marines that had their heads elsewhere, but in most cases, the Marines got along well with the population for the most part.
Okay. Where are you guys staying? Just around the
we're
villages?
sleeping. We'd set up tents, or in a couple of places there was a one place in particular. There was the old French, what's called a pagoda. I don't think it was, but that's what we called it. Concrete walls and so on and so forth, and it probably had been an old some kind of a house at one time or another. May or may not have had a roof. I don't even remember. Some of them did, some of them didn't. And we'd get in some place where it was just basically out of the way of weather, out of the weather as such. Yeah. such as you could, except when it rained. Then there was no hiding from it. The rain got you, no matter what. But we were sleeping on an air mattress, maybe. I mean, we had a lot of stuff that we'd carry with us that a normal grunt wouldn't carry. Okay, because we were going to be there for 2-3 days, and we knew it. And packing up, let the air out of your air mattress and roll the thing on up and go to the other end and blow the air mattress up again, and you're in business. And that's kind of the way it was.
Yeah.
So we were, and then of course, we always had somebody up all night. There was there was a team up every night, all the time. There was never a time where we didn't have somebody on a watch.
Yeah, everyone's always keeping.
You just never know who's going to come to visit.
Yeah.
So.
What were the main things you kept in your medic bag?
I would get ointment by I think it was 4 or 5 pounds of it. Some kind of a bacitracin, neomycin, some other kind of an ointment like that we would literally put it on with sticks. And the other thing that I would go through is the old APC tablet, all-purpose capsule. It was a combination of a little bit of aspirin, sodium bicarb or baking soda, and charcoal. And they were pills like about the size of your fingernail, thereabouts. And I'd get them by the 500 of them at a time, and I'd pass a couple of them out for everybody that came in because they all had belly aches. And at least that's what they said, but how would you know? And that was the primary thing. There was a certain level of I had a couple of IVs in there, which I only had to use once. Battle dressings in the event that somebody really hit the stuff, whatever. But in general terms, most of the stuff that I had was for sick call perspective. Okay. Mostly.
Yeah. Okay. And now, had this village or these villages, had they had any contact with Americans before this? Did you know?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I suspect that they probably had. Because I'm sure the cup squads were working. There were cup squads working around there before. There was 3 squads that were working off each squad. I was in 3-1, and there was first squad, and then the second squad, and a third squad, and they were all kind of gathered around in that particular area. I never visited the other 2 squads, so I don't have any idea what they had as far as people is concerned. No clue. I'm thinking that the Vietnamese seemed to know about the Marines. They knew that we were there to help them. Yeah. We were not there to take them out. Okay. But we had our curfews and so on and so forth. That was standard across the board. We didn't want anybody moving around after dark, and we don't want them moving around until daylight. Yeah. That's just if anything's moving around after dark, they're probably not there for a good reason. Yeah. So.
And because you were so remote, I mean, you talked about you'd get these pills by the 500. Did you have supply problems at all, or were you pretty well supplied?
I never had. I never did. If I needed something, I got it.
That's good.
Yeah.
And going off of that, what were you guys eating?
Sea rats. Yum. And then we would trade because we all lived in the villages, and they lived on the villagers lived on rice. They had rice 3 times a day, whether they liked it or not. So you would go through your sea rats, and you'd pick out some stuff that you personally liked, and there's stuff that I could do without that. And maybe you would swap that with something for one of what we referred to as the mama-sans, one of the ladies that lived in the village, and come eat. You eat with the family.
No.
Okay, so we'd pour a little sea rat on top of rice. That made their rice more tolerable. It made our sea rats more tolerable.
Okay. Did you ever have any problems with eating the local food and, getting...
No.
Okay.
No. No. I don't. I never got sick. I never got any form of dysentery or anything along that line ever.
That's good.
Ever.
Okay. What was your relationship with the Marine squad leader like? Because as you pointed out in the bio you gave us, you technically outranked him.
He didn't do much without checking with me first.
Okay.
He'd say, "Doc, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? What do you think of this, that, so on and so forth?" And that's the way basically we operated all the time that I was there. I didn't push the fact that I was an E5 and he was an E4, but he respected my background. He knew, we chatted. He knew that I wasn't a rookie, and he didn't treat me like one.
Okay.
And I didn't treat him like he was a rookie either. This was his second tour in Vietnam as a corporal. It was my first tour. I'd been around the Marines for 3-4 years, 3 years, I guess, 2.5, 3 years. And so we had a good relationship.
That's good. After a while, do you think that there was any real change in your relationship with the people in these villages? Did they start to trust you guys?
I think so. Okay. I think that we had that. It's like anything else, where you have a group of people that are living in that certain area, where you develop a relationship. There are some of the Marines that didn't want to be there, and they were a pain in the butt. They were a pain in the butt then, probably still are today. But most of them got along with the villagers pretty well, for the most part. I don't ever remember. As a matter of fact, we had one Lance Corporal who, I don't know if he was in love or what. He thought he was. He just stayed in Vietnam. He just would have absolutely stayed there. No questions asked. Now, whether he did or he didn't, I don't know, because I eventually got pulled out of the unit and he was still there. I don't know if he stayed, or went back to the States and turned around, came back to Vietnam. I don't know. But there was many of them that, they developed a positive relationship with the people.
Good. So when you weren't doing the medical clinics, what else were you doing? Were you...
Sleeping. Or, in my case, if I wasn't actually doing, I was doing stuff in the medical stuff. I was either running a radio, or if we could, we'd take a fire team and we'd go back on up to back up to the rear, up to battalion headquarters and get resupplied and that kind of stuff. Because everywhere we went, we walked. We didn't have jeeps, we didn't have mules, we didn't have any of that stuff. We had backs. So we went up to bring back C-rats. We'd have to bring back a couple of cases each, and we'd all bring a couple cases of C-rats apiece, and that's the way we got resupplied, or whatever else we could acquire.
Okay. So how much contact did you have with the enemy during this time?
Once.
During
that time.
Yeah.
And that was on the 19th of September.
Okay. And then, kind of before that, how hostile was this area? Was it a pretty hot area, or was it?
No, it wasn't a real hot area. But this particular night, this one particular night where we got hit, how many people were in that unit that were trying to hit us, I don't know to this day. It was about 9 o'clock at night. I was eating supper with the family, and I heard an explosion, and I bailed out of there. I went and grabbed my gear, and I normally had my gear close by, or at least I knew exactly where it was. I grabbed my gear, went, as they say, go to battle stations. One of my Marines had a round that hit him that, based upon the entry and the exit, I figured it got the lung, because it went in the back of him right here, came out right about here, and the math says that got the lung.
Mm-hmm.
And so I treated him for a sucking chest wound, and had him laying in one of the hooches that we were living in. And after a few minutes, he said, I was standing in the doorway, and I heard somebody holler, "Doc."
Mm-hmm.
And so I took my stuff and I went out to one foxhole and nobody was hurt, went to another foxhole when no one's hurt, and came back inside again. And the patient was a guy by the name of Jack Burns, and he said, "Doc, can you move me?" I said, "Yes, where do you want to go?" He said, "Over in the corner." So I grabbed a handful of shirt and a handful of belt and slipped him in the corner, and I said, "Why did you want me to move you?" He said, "Because when you left that doorway, there were tracer rounds going where you'd been standing."
Oh.
Now, for those that don't know, tracer rounds basically means that there's 4 regular rounds and a tracer round, and that tracer round is it got a little bit of phosphorus in it, usually a yellow, either a green or a red streak behind it, white sometimes, to see what you're shooting at, whether you're whether you're going to hit what you're shooting at, if you will. And if he saw tracer rounds going where I was standing, there was a lot of lead going where I was standing.
Mm-hmm.
So you believe what you want to believe, but the fact of the matter is, I got religion, shall we say. And so I called for the medevac to take Burns out, and the medevac bird was coming in, and we were going to land him in this field. And so the fire team went on out and set it up. And as they popped the flare to bring the bird in, the chase bird took fire.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if you know how medevac operates as such, but in this case, there were 2 CH-43s or 46s, I don't remember which ones, and 2 Huey gunships. Okay. And one bird is going to land, they're going to drop the tail, you're going to put the patient aboard, and he's up and gone.
Yeah.
And the chase bird's back behind, just basically circling. And the gunships are up above a little bit higher, and they're circling as well. And about that time, the chase bird took fire. They all peeled off. And whoever was running the show up above, I happened to be from you to me, away from the radio, and I hear, "You boys sit tight a minute, we're going to take care of your problem for you." And the gunship started to work out.
Ooh.
And they start dropping rockets all the way around the area, and I mean, it was amazing. And then after they got her quieted down, said, "All right, we're gonna try her again." So they brought the bird in, they landed, I got Burns on the bird, and somebody else, I think one of my Popular Force troops was hurt as well. I put both of them on the bird, and the bird lifted off, and away they go. Then things got real quiet. And it stayed real quiet until 6 o'clock the next morning. And about 5 minutes to 6 in the morning, I was on the last radio watch because I couldn't sleep anyhow. And the national anthem just got through playing, pardon me, I went and woke up a fire team. And the fire team consisted of 3 guys. There was Pee Wee, and there was Ron Rossi, and I don't remember who the 3rd guy was. But I woke these 3 guys up, and they were supposed to go out and do a body sweep. And so they got up, national anthem played over Armed Forces radio on my transistor radio, and the last note, an explosion. And so I picked up my stuff and I was flying out across the area to about see what was going on. And I had 2 Marines down. The team leader was Ron Rossi, the Lance Corporal, and a kid by the name of Pee Wee Reese, I think is his last name. Both. Ronnie Ross was laying on his face. Pee Wee's sitting there kind of looking eyeballs crossed, and he's kind of a mess. And the other kid, I don't know where he was. I didn't even see. I don't even remember. And I tried to start an IV on Ronnie and didn't have any success. The IV wouldn't run. I threw the damn thing up against a tree and had a few other words to say at about that same time. And one of my Popular Force troops had taken a round right through here. You could see it laying right on the other side of his arm. And Pee Wee was sitting there kind of looking kind of goofy, and he was a black Marine, and he was looking kind of peaked and a little bit ashen and so on and so forth. And I yelled at him to get his stuff together, and He sat up and straightened up and said, I'm okay, Doc. I'm fine. I said, okay, you better get that way quick because, I ain't got time for both of you. So the birds comes in, loads these two up on the bird, and away they go. So that after that all evolution, now I'm down 3 Marines, or 2 Marines actually, well 3 from one from the night before, and I'm down 3 Marines and a couple Popular Force troops, and about that same time, there's some Vietnamese coming down this little trail with a bed hanging over their shoulder on a bamboo pole. And as we had been out looking for bodies, I took my .45 out and I leveled it at the leader and told them in Vietnamese to halt. And about that time I heard a click, 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 and I look on either side of me and there's 15 Popular Force troops on either side of me, Vietnamese, all loaded and locked on these folks. And something told me, relax. So I hollered at the interpreter and says, have somebody check them out. So the interpreter went up with one of our other Marines and we checked it out, and it was an old lady she was not a VC, she was just an old lady that was in a cot and they were taking her back someplace else. And many years later I've thought about that from the perspective, what would have happened if one of us had pulled the trigger? We'd have wiped them slick. We'd been just died. So anyway, now I have had all kinds of excitement, and so I go back to the area and I said to the sergeant, the interpreter, I said, see if Mama-san's got any beer. Mama-san had a beer, so I drank a quart of beer, and I was working on the second quart when the captain from the rear called and said he wanted to see me, and he is up on the rear, up on the hill right away. Well, now I got 2.5, or almost 2 quarts of beer in me. So I'm really in a fine state of mind. And so I go back on up to the rear, and he proceeds to chew my rear end for calling a medevac in from the night before. We could have lost this, that, and so on and so forth. And I said, yes, sir, 3 bags full, up yours, is basically what I was thinking, but I didn't say that, fortunately. And then I went back on out there and finished my beer and took a nap. There's some other side stories to this evolution that happened after the fact, and I'll tell you about it now, and if you want to return to it later, just be aware. I was sitting in my mother's living room in a Christmas time many years later. And at the time, my brother was married to a lady who thought she knew something about psychology. And she says, so what happened in the war, Don? And my first reaction was, none of your effing business, in no uncertain terms, is what thought went through my mind. And then I look around the room and I got nieces and nephews all over the place looking at me like, well, say something. So I told them the story that I just told you. Then I look at my stepdad, and he's got tears running down his face. And I said, what's the matter with you? Now, he was a World War II MP in Panama. And he said, I thought I was the only one that felt that way. So he had had all this stuff kept inside of him for years and years and years. Now, I had not at that point started writing the story. None of it. So I was teaching school in Waukegan. I was working with a partner, and the partner had the kids writing a story about who am I. And the who am I was where you were born, when your family was, this kind of stuff. And typical 6th and 7th graders whining, I didn't want to do that. I get that. Finally, one day I'd had it. Enough. So I told my aide to put 20 minutes on the clock, and I want to hear a sound in this room. And I proceed to start writing, and I wrote 7 pages on a yellow legal pad in about 7 minutes, said 20 minutes. And then I got to reading it later and said, this ain't half bad stuff. And that's where this whole story came from, where I got to the point where I could actually tell the story. Because up until then, I hadn't told the story. Now, later on, I'm at another junior high, and I'm telling this story, and this little 6th grader comes up to me, and he says, well, Mr. C, what happened to him? I said, what happened to who? He said, the guy that got hit in the back of the head. I said, I don't know. He says, well, next time I see you, I'd sure like to know the answer to that question. So I got about a 2-hour gap. I get on the computer, type in this guy's name. Don't ask me why. I only remember 2 names from the guys that I was with in Vietnam, Ron Rossi and Jack Burns. I don't understand it. Both of them were casualties. And I remembered that Rossi came from Wisconsin. So I type in his name, search. 1 name popped up. The name was Ron Rossi in Greenfield, Wisconsin. Greenfield, Wisconsin, as you know, is right up around by the stadium. And I says, I wonder. I take my cell phone, I punch in the number. Rings twice. Hello. I said, this Ron Rossi? He said, yes, it is. Who's this? I told him who I was. He says, do I know you? I said, Ronnie, I'm the guy to put you on a helicopter. And there's silence on the other end for a while, and he says, were you with me in Vietnam? I said, yeah. I put you on a helicopter. I was the hospital corpsman with you in Vietnam. He said, man, I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember going over there. I don't remember being there. I don't remember getting hurt. I don't remember nothing. I'm just trying to piece his whole story together. He had pictures, but no story. So we chatted for a while, and turns out that he was 100% disabled, of course. Well, maybe not of course, but he was. Living with his mother. He had developed MS, so he was in pretty bad shape.
Yeah.
He needed to have somebody help him into the bathroom, on his chair, all the time. He had to have somebody there all the time. And I really don't know what became of him, because I talked to him a couple of times on the telephone, and I didn't call him back because I just, I didn't think he'd live. Okay, he's probably passed by now. I don't know.
Yeah.
It took me probably 15 years before I would be able to tell that story, and now I'm comfortable with telling the story, even though there is some stuff that reaches out and grabs you every once in a while.
Yeah.
But that particular little episode of September of 1970, I ain't apt to forget ever.
No.
Okay. And it has struck me over the years that there's a number of Marines, sailors, people that have been in varying combat situations that flat ain't going to tell you the story.
No.
And that's where I think that this whole evolution is an important issue, important thing to do.
One thing I was going to ask about was the villagers in this village that you guys were in when you made contact with the enemy. Had they ever been around a battle before, especially?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know that. My guess would be yes. Because the ARVNs, the ARVN Army Republic of Vietnam, ARVN. The ARVN Army was working out in the area. The Popular Force troops were working out in the area. The Popular Force troops were basically like National Guard-like thing. And there was a few of them around with us most of the time. Very few ARVNs. There were a few. One of the boys that was around us a lot was a kid that we called Charlie. Now, I don't think Charlie was Charlie, but as in Viet Cong, I don't think. But Charlie was a good kid, or seemed like a good kid. And he was there at 6 o'clock in the morning. As soon as the curfew was over with, Charlie would be in our area. We would feed him. We would take care of that kid. I mean, he was just a good kid.
Mm-hmm.
He could field strip an M16 or a 60. He could clean them. He knew he could put them. He could do whatever you got to do. He could do it. And when I woke up in the morning, or if I happened to be sleeping at 6 o'clock, which is rare, when he walked in the door or walked into the area, I had a cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And bakshi coffee. So I had my coffee, and I'm all good, and so on and so forth. And one day Charlie didn't show up.
Yeah.
And I asked the interpreter what happened to Charlie, and he says, Charlie Chuhoy. I said, what do you mean Charlie Chuhoy? I mean, he went to the other side. He went VC. I said, well, let's think about it. The kid's about 13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He lives someplace in the village. I don't know exactly where he lived. He lived somewhere in the village, but he didn't show up. But the interpreter said that Charlie VC. Well, I don't think Charlie was VC at all. I think what very likely happened is the VC came in one night and probably screwed a 45 or a 38 in Mom's ear.
Mm-hmm.
And said, Charlie, tell us all you know about this unit. And Charlie, being a 13-year-old kid, probably did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I would, probably.
Yeah.
Probably most of us would.
Mm-hmm.
Did they have a fear of the Vietnamese, of the North Vietnamese and the VC? I suspect so. But they didn't, you know, it was a hard group of people to really read in that regard. They got along with whoever was around with them at that particular point in time. And I've noticed that with Vietnamese that I've come in contact with since. I mean, they're friendly people.
Mm-hmm.
They're nice people,
Mm-hmm.
for the most part.
Yeah.
They were put in a very, very difficult spot, and they did what they had to do to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that some of them did some things to survive that they probably wouldn't have done if they had had their own choice.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where I'm at, you know.
Okay.
I don't remember seeing any of the villagers that were missing a leg or an arm or anything like that as a result of combat or whatever. I don't recall ever seeing that. So I'm sure that they had some contact
Mm-hmm.
with the VC,
Okay.
but I don't know.
Okay.
It would make sense that they would.
Yeah. Yeah. Did any of them get injured as a result of this fighting?
Oh yes, not necessarily. Not necessarily the villagers themselves. I don't remember any of the villagers getting hurt, but some of the popular force troops did get wounded.
Mm-hmm.
Same time when we were catching it, they caught it as well.
Yeah.
I think I put three. I think I put three of them on a helicopter for medevac, if I recall correctly.
Mm-hmm. Going off of that medevac, why were you getting yelled at for calling in medevacs? Because that just, when I read that in your bio, I was like, what the hell?
There is a term which is called cranial proctitis.
Mm-hmm.
That is putting your head squarely up your posterior. And this particular captain that was running this, that was in charge of our unit, was one of these types of guys that was semper fidelis forever and so on and so on and so on and so forth. And I get it, I understand it,
Mm-hmm.
but given the circumstances, I would do exactly what I did. Calling in a medevac was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It turned out that this guy that had the round that went from here to here
Mm-hmm.
never touched the lung.
Hmm.
Turns out that round hit a rib and followed his rib cage all the way around. It popped out on the other side, and he had $1 million wound.
Yeah. I was
Okay.
going to say, go home and buy a Powerball ticket.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Jack Burns got away with it. And granted, he got medevac back to the world as a result of it all, but just the same.
Mm-hmm.
Rossi, as I was telling you about him, I don't know what became of Pee-wee. I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
I know he got shrapnel wounds because when they tripped, one of them tripped a booby trap,
Mm-hmm.
and I suspect it was Ron, but I'm not sure. But one of them tripped the booby trap, and the booby trap went off behind Ron and in front of Pee-wee, and that's the round that caught got Rossi in the back of the head.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, another fast forward type thing. When he and I chatted years later, I came from Vietnam to San Diego to Great Lakes. I was at the administrative command at Great Lakes. He was in the Naval Hospital at Great Lakes at exactly the same time, and we had no contact. I had no idea.
Wow.
Wow, yes. So we continued on with the Cup Squad. I stayed with the Cup Squad then until probably first, second week of December, right in that area, when I got rotated out of there and they pulled me back to the rear, and I was going to be in the rear with the 20 would have been with 1st Battalion, 1st Marines at the time, because we were TAD'd. We basically were administratively attached to 3-5. Then we went to 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, and finally we're 1st Battalion, 1st Marines.
Okay.
And then, so the administrative unit that I was last with was 1-1, and when I got pulled back to the rear, I got pulled back to the same hill, but 1-1 had the area. And I would put in the medical supply, and I worked in medical supply for a little while. And then one of the Marines that was with one of the other units, and I don't remember which battalion or which company, had to go out on emergency leave, and they needed a hospital corpsman. I was the last out, so I'm first back. So I went with a line company, and I was with the line company for like 3-4 days is all.
Okay.
And then they brought me back because the other guy got back off in the emergency leave, and then they sent him back on out there with him again. And we had contact that night. But we were on a search and destroy mission is where we were out on. Looking in tunnels and so on and so forth. Listening to mortar rounds go over the top of your head that were ours going that way over the top of your head was a kind of an interesting sound that you hear. You're glad that it's ours and not theirs, and so forth. Anyway, so I was back there basically until about Christmas time frame thereabouts, and then we were talking earlier about fraternization. It was I think it was Christmas Eve. It was either Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve, one of two. We had a few of our hospital corpsmen and dentists and doctors were fraternizing, shall we say. And they were smoking a little dope and got busted by the command sergeant major.
Oh!
And two lieutenants, both lieutenants, full Navy lieutenants, doctor and a dentist, got court-martialed as a result of it all, and 11 or 12 hospital corpsmen got it as well. So that'll shake out your ranks real quickly. And I'm working med supply, and I needed some signatures, so I'm going back to the rear, and I went back to headquarters, division headquarters. And the senior chief calls me off the side, and he says, "What do you know about drugs?" And I said, "Why do you want to know, Senior Chief?" Knowing the people that just got busted. He said, "Well, the division inspector is looking for somebody to teach drugs, do a drug education program for the division, and I thought you might be a good candidate." Now, why he heard about me, what he knew about me, I haven't a clue. But he sent me over to the division inspector to see Colonel Zodke. And Colonel Zodke said, "Yep, this is the guy I want." So he had his own particular idea what he thought ought to be taught. And he was the colonel, so I got the last word in. He wanted me to be able to appreciate the results of drug abuse. And he said, "One of the things I want you to do," he says, "I'll have the driver take you down to the morgue." And I remember going into the morgue, and these were all obviously bodies from combat ops, some of them non-combat ops, drug abuse, and so on and so forth. And walking into a morgue in Vietnam, is a smell that is distinct.
Mm-hmm.
You don't forget it.
Yeah.
And the poor guys that were working in there were just doing their job, but they looked just peaked, you know?
Yeah.
And I suppose after seeing the same stuff day after day after day, I can well imagine, okay? So that's one of the things that I had to do. And then we put together, I've been avoiding pharmacy and drugs for years, okay? So now all of a sudden I got to teach it. So I put together a package to give drug presentations, sorted out, had the division provost marshal put together a package of material of, I think most of them were all real drugs, and I had them in a box about like that, you know. I think it was about 2.5 foot square.
Okay.
And sealed in, pretty sealed, so that people wouldn't be busting into it. And I was told I had $10,000 to $20,000 worth of illegal drugs in my possession, and I'm carrying those around by helicopter and handouts and all this stuff. And so I would catch a bird after I got my package all put together, and the colonel was happy with it. Then I would fly, and now first of all, I'd never been an instructor at this point. My only instructing had been with the Marines. That's it. I'm the guy that got the F in speech in college, in speech, okay? So I learned how to teach at that point, and I would go around to units and go forth and do no more dope and so on. I remember flying in one morning into one of the areas which is called Camp Baldy, and that was a hill out in the middle of no man's land, what we referred to as Indian country, which is not politically correct in today's world, but that's what it was. It was anybody out there was dead. If we saw something move, kill it.
Yeah.
So I'll fly into Baldy, and I was supposed to give this presentation to this unit. And I get a canteen cup and light up a cup of coffee, and one of the guys says, "Sergeant over here just jumped on a frag last night." I said, "He what?" "He jumped on a fragmentation grenade last night. Somebody threw a grenade into the area, and the Marine saw this thing, and he jumped on top of the thing and it didn't go off." And now he's sitting over there, just like you are, having a cup of coffee, just like, well, good morning to you too, after what had happened the night before. Now, I'm hopeful that they wrote him up for at least a Navy Star, at least.
Yeah.
At least. I don't know if they ever did or not, whatever. But I listened to these guys' story and for a little while, and I said, I don't think you need to hear about illegal drugs today. Sergeant says, "Thanks, Doc. Appreciate that. Well, tell him you were here." And I got on a chopper and I flew back out of there because it was part of the mail route. The choppers come around, pick you up, and fly you someplace else and drop you off. So I caught the mail route and I went back to Da Nang, and that was the end of that. On one of these return trips, I had a second-class hospital corpsman that was in the same area as I am. He's probably sleeping like over there. And about 2 in the afternoon, and he is rip-roaring plastered drunk. "What's the matter with you?" What's the matter with you? What happened to you? Why did you do that? "You ever had 152 holes in your helicopter?" I said, "Excuse me?" Seems that in the morning, somebody come around and said, "You got anything to do, Doc?" He said, "No, we're going to make a medevac flight on out such and such and so forth. Want to ride along?" He said, "Sure." He goes and gets on a helicopter, and they fly out over an Indian country and took fire. 152 holes in the helicopter and never touched a soul. Okay? Now, granted, they got hydraulic fluid floating, so on and so forth. That pilot was one hell of a pilot.
Oh, yeah.
Brought that bird back, brought it back and landed, and so on and so forth. And this guy, realizing that there's holes all over the place, it looked like a sieve. Now, I think I need a beer, or 2, or 3, or a dozen, or whatever, or a case or 2. But by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he pretty well ripped, and I don't blame him in the least. I don't blame him in the least. So we were chased around out there doing the drug thing for a while, and this goes on until roughly first part of April time frame, thereabouts, middle of March, first part of April, and I had orders to go back from there to Long Beach, California for separation.
Mm-hmm.
And a Colonel Zotke calls me into his office. He says, "Doc, got this message came in this morning. Read it." So I read it. I said, "That's nice. What's the point?" He said, "I want you to apply for this school."
Uh-huh.
I said, "Colonel, I'm getting out of the Navy." He said, "Maybe you didn't hear me." I said, "Yes, sir." So I applied for the school. Now, the school was Drug and Alcohol Education Specialist School.
Mm-hmm.
It was supposed to be held in San Diego, California.
Mm-hmm.
So we came back to the States. Got orders were changed.
Mm-hmm.
To go from 1st Marine Division to San Diego for further direction to move to Great Lakes, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
I was still single,
Mm-hmm.
but I had a girlfriend. We were going to get married. And I sent her a letter and told her that I was staying in the Navy and I was going to Great Lakes. And she sent me a blazing letter back that she was not real happy about leaving California. And I sent her a letter back with equal blazes to the effect that I'm going to Great Lakes.
With or without you?
With or without you. And the next letter back says, "I'll go." So we landed in San Diego at San Bernardino, same place I started from.
Mm-hmm.
Took a bus to San Diego. She met me at the train station. We went to her folks' house and stayed there for a couple days. And we reported into Service School Command and went down and wanted to check it out.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't have to be there till 1st May. I wanted to check it out. So I went on down there. This is on a Monday. And I walk on in there and I said, "I just want to check this place out because I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be reporting into this school the 1st of May.
Mm-hmm.
And this chief says, "You're who?" I told him. He said, "Wait a minute. You're supposed to be in school this morning." I said, "Excuse me? I don't know anything about that." He said, "No, we need you in school this morning. Can you be here in the morning?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "When did you get back from Vietnam?" I said, 3 days ago. He says, "Okay. Okay, can you be in school in the morning?" I said, "Sure, I can do that." So we go to the Navy Exchange, and I bought a new set of uniforms. And I go on in to take this course.
Mm-hmm.
And we go through the course. And I get through the course in 4 days or 5 days. It was supposed to be 10 days long, and I finished it in 4. Just sit down and do it. Just get it done, crank it, and get it over. It's done with, okay?
Right.
And then I started drug education specialist school. I found out afterwards that there were 42, 43 of us that were scheduled for this class. 23 of us got in the front door, and 13 of us graduated.
Wow.
And in that time frame, we decided we were going to get married, so we'd get married before we come to Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided we'd get married on 15th of May, and we didn't have anything set up for it, so we talked to the minister, and he said, "Yeah, we can do this, that, so and so, so forth." So I'm still going to school. You run across people from time to time that have been in a combat situation, and I remember one time walking down the street in San Clemente with a sergeant
Mm-hmm.
who'd just come back from Vietnam, and I had not been there at the time. And a car went by and backfired, and he disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked around, and all of a sudden, all I see is eyeballs sticking out of this bush.
Mm-hmm.
And he felt kind of stupid because it was a car backfiring. That's all it was. I'm going through this course in San Diego, and we're working with Border Patrol, south of San Diego and San Ysidro. There's a big archway.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear a pop, 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 and I hit the deck. I'm trying to dig a hole in the middle of Interstate 5.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the guys says, "Doc, you're not there no more." And I kind of feeling stupid. There I am, a jacket and tie, laying in the middle of Interstate 5 trying to find a foxhole. Turns out that there was a guy on a bosun chair hanging up on top of an archway over there, and he's drilling holes in the side of this with 22, the driving rivets in, you've done that. Well, I didn't know he was up there. So he fired off 3 quick ones driving in these rivets, and I heard the shots, and I hit the ground.
Yeah.
Okay? Mm-hmm. To this day, it's been 40 plus years since I've been in Vietnam. If I hear a sound that I'm not expecting, I'll jump. Mm-hmm. To this day. It's not as pronounced as it was, mm-hmm. but I jump. And you run across many combat veterans. If that's the kind of stuff that happens to them, they jump. Mm-hmm. Or they're spooked properly, mm-hmm. okay? Because it's a whole different world over here than it is when you're in a combat situation. I can recall many nights where I would hear gunfire, and I would go from sound asleep, if that was possible, mm-hmm. to up with full battle gear, ready to go, and then I'd realize, whoops, that's ours. We're good. Mm-hmm. Lay back down, go back to sleep. Most veterans that were in combat will act that way. Mm-hmm. Many will, and so that's just an issue. Okay. So anyway, we get our orders, graduate from school, we get married, all that, and go to North Dakota to visit my folks and so on, because we didn't have the big crowd there. We just did a reception in North Dakota, mm-hmm. and we came to Chicago, where I am attached to the administrative command at Great Lakes. Mm-hmm. My job is and I'm about ready to re-enlist, so I did re-enlist for mm-hmm. 5 years at that point.
All right.
We went from, we were at administrative command for like 2-3 years, and because drug use is a morale problem, mm-hmm. if not a moral problem. I was attached to the chaplains department, which is kind of an interesting situation. Mm-hmm. So I am sitting there with all kinds of captains and commanders and lieutenant commanders and
right.
so on and so on and so on and so forth. And we set up a drug program, a drug class as such, uh-huh. and we would bring in staff members from throughout Service School Command and Administrative Command and Great Lakes areas and so on, and have them go through our course. Mm-hmm. And we worked in civilian clothes, jacket and tie. That's okay. What we worked in for like 4 years, whatever. And so that's what I did for the remaining 4 years. Mm-hmm. At the end of that 4-year period of time, it was time to change ends and do something else. Uh-huh. Time to go back to the Navy again. I had made first class at that point.
Oh.
So when I'd made first, we were transferred from there to Guam.
Oh, man.
And interestingly enough, when I went to Guam, I'm working, first of all, I worked in patient affairs. And patient affairs takes care of the administration for all the patients that are in the hospital, mm-hmm. and so on and so forth. But it was in 1975 that I was there. And this was about the same time that Saigon fell.
Yeah, so you would have been there when they had all the
Exactly.
refugees.
Exactly. I was the guy that took care of the paperwork for the Vietnamese that were in Tent City, uh-huh. on the beach.
Wow.
And then when they got out of Saigon, they got on anything that would float.
Yeah.
And we would, many of our ships picked them up, brought them to Guam, or dropped them off at some particular point in time, families, whatever there was, and then they would evacuate them and send them out to varying different parts of the world, United States being part of it. Some went to Canada, some went to varying places, mm-hmm. where it wasn't Vietnam.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was another kind of a follow-on experience as a result of it all. I found a piece of paper yesterday where I was a first class, where I got a piece of paper signed by a captain, somebody or another, for Operation New Life. Got me another ribbon. So we spent 2 years on Guam. Mm-hmm. Patient affairs were the first year. The second year I was working in education. and came out of there. It was supposed to have been a 3-year tour, but it turned out being 2. And got transferred from there back to Camp Pendleton, California, where I was going to be there for a year. I was in the division surgeon's office and got sent over to the Naval Hospital, where I was basically what they referred to as a division liaison. So you would get a young hospital corpsman that would be coming into the division. They didn't have a job for him right away, so they sent him to the hospital, and the hospital would find him whatever, and I was the guy that kept track of all those guys and where they were. And then anytime we're going to have some kind of an operation where we're going, where the Marines are going to go do something, and they needed X number of hospital corpsmen, I would be the guy to go on out and say, I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys. You 6 package stuff. You're going back to division. You're back to division tomorrow. Okay. And that's what I did for the next year that I was there. My intention at that point in time was to stay in California because my wife's family was there. And I contacted the detailer, and the detailer said the only thing that we have for a hospital corpsman on the West Coast is in Barstow. Now, if you know anything about the geography of California, Barstow is about 3 hours away from San Diego, out in the middle of no place. It was a Marine Corps supply depot. And I said, well, that sounds to me like a transfer. And it's not a matter, I just bought a house in California and I'm happy with the house, all the stuff. I want to stay there. So I said, well, it sounds like I got a transfer. So I put the house up for sale and started looking at places of opportunities, and the only opportunity that I was really interested in was either Great Lakes or Green Bay. And so I called my wife and said, this is what our choices are. She says, Green Bay first, Great Lakes second. I said, I agree. I called the detailer. Green Bay was full. Fine, I'll go to Great Lakes. So there's 2 of us that transferred to Great Lakes at that particular point in time from Camp Pendleton. And so I came back here to Great Lakes, and I was here. First stop was patient affairs. I worked in patient affairs for a year or so. Made chief. Actually, I made chief at Camp Pendleton, actually. Made chief at Camp Pendleton, then came on up here, came to Great Lakes. I was here for like a year, then I got transferred over to another area, and I worked 3 different places. I was the chief of security, and I was chief of operating management service, and I did a lot of those kinds of jobs like that. Wanted to stay. This was the time that Jimmy Carter was the president, and interest on houses was about 12-13%. You were turning over a house about once a year. I mean, it was that you put a house on, if you're lucky, you'd move it in a year. In the meantime, you got a house. I said, well, this all makes sense. So they were going to transfer me back to California, of course. Of course. And now I've still got a house, and I'm not happy. And I said, enough of this stuff. I ain't going to do this no more. So I went to the Master Chief, and I told Master Chief that I'm going off on active duty. That's it. I can't do this no more. And he said, I understand. Don't want you to go, but I understand. I get it. So I went off on active duty, stayed off on active duty for about 6 months, and was talking to a guy. He said, you ever thought about going to the reserve program? And I had sort of kind of thought about it, sort of kind of. He said, I got a billet for you. So this was in December of 81? Yeah, 81. And next stop from there was to the Cargo Handler Battalion. And I worked with the Cargo Handler Battalion for 2 years, thereabouts. And then got an opportunity to go back to Recruit Training Command as an instructor. And I was supposed to be teaching first aid, or so I thought. So I got in there teaching first aid, and the next thing you know, the senior chief that was running it, I had just made senior. And he says to me, would you be willing to take this place over? And I said, I just got here. He said, I understand. I need to get out of here. You're driving me crazy. I said, okay. So we went to the boss, and the boss said, yep, that'd be fine. So I took the job and became the division officer for basic military orientation, recruit training command. That did that because detailers have a sense of humor. My last day of active duty was the 24th of December. So I went from there, went off on that active duty stint back to the reserve side of the house. Went from the reserve side of the house, I went to what was called a CHIMSIS unit, and I don't remember what CHIMSIS means, but it's basically civilian health care, whatever, where we were supposed to contract with civilian hospitals to make, in the event that we had a Kuwait or a whatever, and we got overloaded at the regular civilian military hospital, we could send these patients on out to go to a civilian hospital. So that's what our job was, to go around and basically schmooze with the higher ups of civilian hospitals. You could take how many people in the event, you could take how many, you could take how many. That continued on for about, I was in that job for about a year and a half, 2 years. Accidentally found out that I made Master Chief. And, well, actually, while I was still a senior, I went back on active duty, went back to the reserve side, went back to recruit training command for like 4 or 5 months, got my degree, got that all taken care of. Once I got my degree, then I started looking seriously about what am I going to do when I grow up. And got a civilian job working instructor training school at the Naval Base at Great Lakes, where I was teaching people how to teach, which was kind of cool. And I did that for like 13 years. And in the meantime, I had made Master Chief in the reserve side of the house, and the only billet available was on the Readiness Command. So I went to the Readiness Command, and my first boss was your instructor, J. Allen Williams. John Allen Williams was the Readiness Command, or Readiness boss, and myself and a guy by the name of Master Chief Ron Wills, the two of us worked hand in hand together. Turned out we were born a year apart. He's from Nebraska, a submariner, submarine Master Chief machinist mate, and the two of us are friends to this day.
Oh, that's awesome.
And if you ever see anything from John Allen Williams referring to Ron Wills or Don Collings, well, that's when you get on Facebook. That's the three of us.
Okay.
John Williams can find the greasiest spooned restaurants in the most ungodly places you have ever been to in your life, but he can find good breakfast. Always good. He was tremendous about that. But a great guy, absolutely spectacular. So I'm with the Readiness team now for about 8 years. Okay, and I stayed there until I retired in '97.
Okay.
And the speaker at my retirement was John Allen Williams. Wow. So that is the quick and dirty. That's the last 15, 20 years of reserve side of the house. Not nearly as eventful as the first 4.
Yeah.
I'm asked from time to time whether or not the journey was worthwhile, and the answer was yes, absolutely worthwhile. Would I do it again? Yes, I would do it again. Would I recommend a youngster try it? Maybe. Depends on what their psyche is. You got to realize it's a different. Military is a whole different world than living in your mom and dad's basement, looking at your posters on the ceiling. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff that that I'm involved with, ROTC programs and so on and so forth, to try and take a look at it. Take a look at it. Would I recommend it for everybody? Not on your life. Not on your life. But it's a great way to find out what you're made of.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway. I'll let you go to your questions for a while, rather than me just running the mouth. Go.
No, I like that a lot. I was gonna get back to we're jumping back to Vietnam.
No, that's fine.
Because you got into that, and I didn't want to interrupt your chain of thought, but when you were after you got out of the civilian affairs unit, the unit where you were at that town, you spent a little bit of time as just a straight line medic or corpsman. How did those two units compare?
Well, I was only with that line company for about 4 or 5 days, so it's really difficult to make a real distinct
Okay.
break. But I don't think that there was the camaraderie. I didn't develop the camaraderie with that unit that I did with the first unit.
Okay.
And only because of time.
Yeah.
I am not necessarily a bashful individual, and I would have been very likely built some pretty strong relationships with some of those guys, very likely. But an infantry unit got a different psyche than a combined unit pacification program unit
Right.
does. Totally different psyche.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the guys on the Cup Squad should have been in line units, and the other way around. Okay, there's been a lot of stuff written about that era and about the thinking and the process and the stuff that happened. I just recently finished Rumor of War.
Yeah, Philip Caputo.
Wow. Just flat wow. Incredible book. And I could absolutely relate to that kind of stuff, to much of the stuff that he was talking about, even though what they were doing was more direct combat than what I did. We were more in a protection mode than a combat mode,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, because you were there to be with the civilians and hearts and minds versus
Yes,
find the VC or the NVA and kill them.
yes, exactly. Yes. Now, I mean, don't misunderstand. Each one of our guys who was with us was perfectly capable of killing
Oh
somebody.
yeah.
You know,
And as you said, because I
know.
remember from your bio talking about you guys did an inventory of all your ammo the day after, and all of a sudden it's like, where did all the ammo go?
Yes.
And then you're looking around at the ground, there's all this spent brass, and it's, oh, yeah, that's
exactly,
where it went.
exactly. Yes, it was when the stuff hits the fan, you know, we were fully capable of trying to protect ourselves. But I'm gonna tell you what, I love seeing a Huey fly over. Hueys are great. Or just an episode. I'm not a big fan of helicopters, but I like Hueys. All right, I like the sound of a Huey.
Yeah.
And you know, if it would not have been for a Huey, I probably would be dead. So you know,
Yeah, you talked about them coming in and, you know, we'll take care of your problem.
absolutely. And thank you very much.
I just have to ask about, there was one incident you talked about with a lieutenant jumping into a foxhole that you'd been spitting into.
Well,
what facilitated that?
Because well, here's what happened. We got this greenhorn lieutenant. He came on out, and you do not wear your rank in the bush. You don't.
Well, especially back in those days, it was, you know, two nice shiny little gold bars.
Unless you are a greenhorn lieutenant who comes on out with the butter bars on his sleeve, on his collar, and so on and so forth. He comes on out, and he's sitting there, and I was telling the story to a friend of mine the other day, and he says, "You are rotten." And I said, I've been told that before. We got a foxhole that's about 4 feet deep. And it's rigged with a chair, with a seat in it. So you dig a foxhole straight down 4 feet, then we come back about a foot or so, come on up about 2-3 feet, and we got a chair so we can sit down. So you can actually sit down inside your foxhole.
Oh,
it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And in the rainy season, they get full of water. And I had a bench. We took borrowed a bench from the Mama Sons and put that on out there next to it. And that's where we got our radio watch.
Okay.
And the lieutenant comes on out there and he sits down next to me. How's it going, Doc? I said, going fine. And we were just talking. And I see tracer rounds. And he says, should we get in the hole? I said, no, we're fine. We're fine. They're a long ways off, and I think they're theirs. Now, I'm rotten. And all of a sudden, here comes some more rounds, and I said, here they come again, Lieutenant, jump! And I put my elbow right square in his ribs, and he jumped in the foxhole. Now, that foxhole is about 3/4 full of water, and tobacco juice, and God only knows whatever else.
Yeah.
And he come out of there looking like a drowned rat, and I'm falling off my bench, just roaring laughing. And about that time, some Marine come on out there, Doc, what the? Oh my God. And it turned out the guy that would come out and ask the question was Pee Wee, the guy that got hurt about 3-4 days later, or a week or so later, or whatever. The next day, I do not understand this attitude, but the next day that lieutenant decided that he needed to go to another unit. He didn't want to stick around with me no more. So he left and he went to the other unit, and about a week later I'm on the radio about dark. And they had the other unit had contact. Third platoon had, third squad had contact. And they heard the conversation. The conversation was our actuals got a through. Our actuals his WIA. Actual meaning the lieutenant. And they weren't going to call in the medevac, Semper Fidelis forever, we'll make it until daylight, all this other garbage. Next morning, here comes the fire team walking into our area with this lieutenant doing a step and a half. And he says, Doc, can you change my dressing? I said, sure. So I look at his foot, and he's got a hole right there. As if it had gone between the Achilles and the ankle bone, through and through. That's it. Never touched a nerve, never touched an artery, never touched nothing. It was soft tissue all the way through. $1 million wound, back to the world, lieutenant. Okay? So, I think the lieutenant got his revenge. So, anyway.
That's awesome.
$1 million wound, no doubt about it.
Lucky
guy. I don't know if he shot himself or not. I have no idea. Pretty good shot if he did.
Yeah. That'd be tough. Yeah. And then somewhere in there, you helped a lady deliver a baby, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Yes, I did.
What's that?
Again, one of those nights where the interpreter and I were working on a few beers. And there was a lady over there who we see every time we pass through, and she's very pregnant. And somebody came over and started talking to the interpreter, and the interpreter says, "Hey, Doc, you know that old lady lives over there?" And I said, "Yeah." "Well, she's going to have a baby." I said, "Wonderful. She wants you to be there." So I proceed to try to get myself more or less sober-ish, act at least somewhat sober. And over I went and caught that little character. That was after she had had like 7 or 8 of them, so it wasn't like it was a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, for her, it wasn't a big deal. She'd been through this drill before. So anyway, yeah. Yes, I delivered a baby. Yes.
Hey, and you delivered the baby while slightly drunk. I think you got one up on most OBGYNs.
Indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Getting back to what, so then you end up doing the drug educator guy. Did you see a lot of drug use in Vietnam?
No.
Was it starting to be a problem? Okay.
I am not so naive as to believe that there was not drug use going on. I am sure that some of the Marines likely, especially those in the rear echelons, likely were smoking a little grass and or shooting a little heroin or whatever. I'm sure that probably happened.
Yeah.
But in a combat situation, I don't think so.
Yeah, that's...
No. I mean, that's suicide.
Oh, yeah.
None of the Marines that I worked with, none, had any issue at all with it. We all drank beer, okay? Yeah. But as far as using drugs, out of the question. Yeah. Did not happen. Did it happen? Yes. Was it to the degree that people sometimes make it out to be? I don't think so. But it happened. And I mean, I am not going to sit here and tell you that that I had an impact on that one way or the other. I don't know. I don't know. All I know is that was what the colonel wanted us to do. That's what we put together. That's the package we did. But I find it very, very difficult to believe that line Marines were so naive as to go on out there and try to figure that they're going to get through the day easier if they're smoking some dope.
Yeah.
I just have a difficult time comprehending that.
Oh yeah.
Is it possible for the people in the rear with the gear? Possible.
Mm-hmm.
But I never heard about it.
Yeah.
Never, some crazy stuff happened, but I don't think that it was nearly to the degree that it's written up to be.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I was interested about that. So now that you're staying back in the rear more because you're doing this, did your accommodations get a little nicer than a hole or a nice soft patch of grass?
Well, yeah, a little bit. But mosquitoes are mosquitoes are mosquitoes, and flies are flies are flies.
Mm-hmm.
Flies during the daylight and mosquitoes at night.
Mm-hmm.
You can tent yourself in all you want, but mosquitoes are going to find you.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a piece of bear hide showing up, they're going to find it. Mosquitoes was the primary issue at night.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was back in the rear, we kind of, I don't remember if we had a net. We had a net someplace in there where we kept the mosquitoes at least somewhat subdued, but you're not gonna get rid of them.
No.
So the accommodations were a little bit better. The meals were better because you actually had real cooks.
Yeah.
Cooking real meals. Now, there may be some argument that it wasn't the best, but it beat sea rats.
Yeah.
It beat sea rats. Sea rats is not my favorite food, needless to say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I understand long rats is better. The rats that they have, rations that they have today are better. I don't know. I've only tried them once, and it was so-so,
Yeah.
Didn't do much for me.
Yeah. MREs they're okay, but whenever my ROTC unit goes on field training, if we can get hot chow, it's like, oh yeah, we'll take that over.
You take whatever hot chow they feed.
and it's like
my mother said, if you like it, it's ready. If you don't, it's over. And that's the basic truth. Whatever's on the food line you eat, you're happy to have it.
People are like, what are your meals? We don't know. So
we don't know.
You just eat it? Yeah. Because the alternative is that.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
You'll like it.
Exactly.
So how did most people react to to sitting through your drug class? Did most of them seem interested, or was it just, oh great, another class?
I generally thought I had a positive reaction from people. I have developed a style of enthusiasm when I'm teaching a subject, of putting together a good story or trying to lay it out in a fashion that made some sense, and tried to bring it in with enough realism without scaring them off at the same time. And I, for those that I've dealt with in Vietnam in particular, was a good reaction. Stateside's a little different situation. Stateside, there were, in fact, people that were either cocaine or some other type of heroin or speed or something. I had a kid in a classroom one time that I called him in to do we were doing a demonstration. I wanted him to come on in and talk about his drug use and so on and so forth. He's snorting speed right up in front of the classroom, and nobody in the place noticed it except me.
Whoa.
And when he left, I said, anybody notice anything different about what this kid was doing? I said, no, he didn't do that. And so that's precisely the point. His kid's snorting speed right in front of your nose, and you didn't even see it.
Whoa.
So I mean, I don't know what impact. I don't know what impact we actually had. For the individual as an experimenter, we may have had an impact. But for the individual that's a mess psychologically to start with, and they're looking for an escape mechanism, God himself is not going to change their mind.
No.
And when the time comes, hopefully God will help them.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Who were your classes mostly aimed at? Were they aimed at guys just coming into country to be like, hey, there are drugs in the country, but don't touch them? Or was it just anybody you could teach?
In Vietnam specifically?
In Vietnam specifically,
it would be a unit.
Okay.
the messages would go on out to the individual units. We'd like to have Doc come on in and do such and so. I had a sergeant working with me who would make contact with the units and say, hey, who's going to be in the area? I'd like to have Doc come on out and do a presentation. And somebody else was doing the scheduling for me. And all I had to do was catch the mailbird.
Okay.
And go around and sit down. And it was whoever they sent. I would have as few as 8 or 10 to as high as 150 people at a time. Okay. I may have the whole unit, the whole company.
Wow.
You know, and that's it just varied. Just whoever they happened to send, they sent. I found a piece of paper the other day, signed off by the commanding officer of the 9th Marines, who had sent a note back to my boss, Colonel Zodke, about what a great and wonderful presentation I had given to 130 some odd people or whatever the case should be. And it was kind of cool. Captain Z, Colonel Z, thank you very much. Put that in your record. So, and I still got it.
Nice little...
I still got the piece of paper, so that's kind of cool.
That's awesome. What was the most prevalent drug in Vietnam?
I think would have been two very likely heroin and cannabis, pot, such.
And of the
marijuana.
Of the two, I'm guessing heroin was probably the worst.
It's easier to get.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
easier to get. They could get that. You could swap that for a pack of cigarettes.
Wow. That's
yeah.
Crazy. When did you find out that your deployment was going to be over to Vietnam?
When did I find out that it was going to be over?
Had you known your end date from the time you got there? Or?
I knew my approximate end date. I knew that the latest that I would be there would be June.
Okay.
But we got word that the division was going to start to consolidate and be pulled back in about March or so. So I actually had orders out. I think the orders that I've had were like the 11th or 12th of April, right in that area. I mean, I didn't have a long turnaround time.
Okay.
It was a matter of, as a matter of fact, I was coming out on a Navy flight, and they wouldn't let me go on out in camis. So they said, you got to have a Navy uniform. So I went down to the naval station and bought a set of whites and one row of ribbons and a white hat. And that's when I
flew home.
Reported aboard. I didn't have a sea bag. My sea bag had long since disappeared. I don't know where it started at 3-5, and I don't know where it went from there. I have no clue. So I hope somebody enjoyed it. But that was a matter of a very, very quick turn. You know, I mean, it was a matter of the flight's going on the 19th, and we need to have you on it. If so, you got to be in whites.
Okay.
So, okay, very well. So I went down, got a set of whites, and saddled up. Let's go.
All right. How long did the flight take to get back? Same layover pattern?
About half the time as it took to get there. No, not really. I think we were in the air probably 12, 14 hours.
Okay.
That's a guess. Because when we came out of Da Nang, we flew from Da Nang to Hickam. And Hickam Air Force Base, where they refueled and changed crews. And we all went in and had a beer at 6 o'clock in the morning, because it's 5 o'clock somewhere, and noon somewhere, whatever, that's the song. And then we proceeded to fly from there on into San Bernardino. We got in there at about, probably dark, 5, 6 o'clock, 7, somewhere in there. And because I was on a bus. I was on my bus heading for San Diego, and I was in San Diego by 9:30, 10, somewhere in there.
Okay. And then, did you get to see your family pretty quick after you got back?
Well, I didn't see my mother, my brothers, sisters, mother and father, and so on and so forth until after I finished school.
Okay.
Because I went from there right straight to school.
Yeah.
And got married, and then we got in that old Ford and headed for Williston.
Okay.
And only blew up the motor once between there and Williston, North Dakota. So. Okay.
I'd call that successful. One thing I was curious about, did you ever experience any negativity towards your service?
I can't say that I actually did. I think I was aware that it was out there, that it was the negativity was there, but I can't really sit here and say that I was ever accosted in any way, shape, or form, being a baby killer or anything along that line.
Right.
I didn't hear any of that stuff.
Okay. And then, had you even considered making this into a career, or had it just been, I'll do the Navy for a little while, and then see where it goes? And
there's a thing in life called turning points. I think any one of us could sit down and take a 3x5 card and write down 4 or 5 individuals that have had an impact upon where we are today. There is no doubt in my mind that the primary influencer on why I stayed in the Navy was Colonel Zodke. When he said, "Come on in here and apply for I want you to apply for this school." First of all, he was my boss, but I had a great deal of respect for him. He was a good hand, even if he was from Wisconsin. But anyway, Colonel Zodke was just a good guy, and I think I would say that was an influence, a starting influence right there. And then I got to looking at it down the road, the second shift or second time around. What are you going to do? You're going back to North Dakota, go back in the oil field? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? You got a job here, it pays regular.
Yeah.
So what's the issue? Okay. So, and I really honestly didn't have any consideration of sticking around for 20, 30 years. I certainly didn't figure I was a 30-year guy. I never thought about that. Okay? The only reason that I stuck around for 30 years, I had a good job.
Yeah.
And paid regular. Okay?
And
I could stay for 30. As a Master Chief, I can stay for 30 years. And so I enjoyed doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
So I can't, it wasn't really a matter of sitting down one day and saying, gee, if I map this thing out for 20 years down the road, I could do X, Y, and Z. That never dawned on me. That never dawned on me. Going into the Navy was an accident, for Pete's sake. Walking down the street, there's a sign that make a left turn, and there you go.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's kind of where it's at, I'm sure that there are people that will, I know there are people that will say, well, I'm coming into the Navy and I want to make a career of it. Well, not so fast. Not so fast. Get 4 out of the way and then find out if you like this stuff. That's the advantages of being an enlisted guy in the military. I don't care what branch it is.
Yeah.
You go in for a 3-year hitch or a 4-year hitch or a 5-year hitch, 6-year hitch, and at the end of that, coming up in the end, you say, well, now what am I going to do? What's next? What am I going to do?
Yeah.
You got your degree out of the way. You got your school out of the way. You got any certificates. You got a possibility of a job. What are you going to do? Hey, wait a minute. This thing pays regular. Sign for another 3-4 years and see what it looks like.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you look back and say, gee, I've been here for 10, 12, 14 years.
Yeah.
I had 14 years in on active duty when I stepped off active duty and went in the reserves. And 16 years later, I retire. No?
Yeah.
And it's paid me well. It's been very good to me.
Yeah.
Okay. I see stuff all the time. So, when do you pull the plug? When's the time to go? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
You know it when it's there. When it gets to the point where you've had enough, you'll know it. And sometimes it's a matter of the Navy or the military says, you're high your tenure, son. Pack your trash and go home.
Yeah.
I'd have stayed for more than 30 years. I would have. But I couldn't. 30 years, that's it. That was my maximum. 30 years, hit the road, you're gone. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because it gives those coming up behind an opportunity.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it.
Yeah. My favorite thing was the new command sergeant major of the Army. He was at sergeant major school talking to that graduating class, and he said, the day you wake up and you're not excited about your job and it's not fun, that's the day you go fill out your DD-214.
Absolutely.
And I agree with that because it's like, when you stop enjoying what you're doing,
Absolutely.
it's time to go.
You're always going to run across situations where the individual you work for is a pain in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
The job is a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
I have a cousin who's got a daughter married to an Army sergeant, staff sergeant, and they just got transferred from Maryland to Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And she just got situated in her house, and she's got 4 kids, and she's just that, and so on and so on and so forth. She's having a ball. I don't know if he is. Well, I don't know if he's having a good time. He's Schofield Barracks, but I suspect he's having a good time too, probably.
Yeah.
And now he's got to look back and say, hey, I got 8, 10, 12 years in, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do? 8 more years and I can retire. The world is changing.
Mm-hmm.
The business of the military is different today than it was. I mean, the retirement system is going to change dramatically. Yeah. It's going to change. It's got to. Mm-hmm. But when the average active duty guy spends 20 years in the military and then they retire and they're drawing 50% of their base pay and they're getting a COLA raise, why walk?
Yeah.
Why? I mean, that ain't bad. I know a lot of guys that are making a whole lot more on retiree than they were as an active duty guy.
Well, and you join when you're late teens, early 20s. You do your 20. You're in your 40s when you get out.
Precisely.
You can easily start another 20 or 30-year career.
Precisely. And many do.
Mm-hmm.
Many do. And if they're doing what they should be doing while they're on active duty, and if the people that are around them are doing the right thing, encouraging them to get their certifications, get their degree, get some skill, get their skill sets up so that it's comparable to what goes on in the civilian world. Hospital corpsmen, frankly, all they are is just chasing bedpans. Is all they're good for when they retire. Unless they got that degree in healthcare administration or something such thing like that.
Yeah.
Then they can go off and get a pretty good job. And I know many at the VA North Chicago, for example, that are running around those GS 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, and they're young. Mm-hmm. And at 60, they retire, they got double checked, they're living fat, dumb, and happy for the rest of their life.
Oh, yeah. One thing I really wanted to ask about was the transition from being military to then being a civilian working on the military base. How'd you like that? What was that like? When you came back to teach people how to be instructors?
Well, for me it was an absolutely fantastic experience.
Okay.
Because I was dealing with good people. Mm-hmm. The people that are coming back to be instructors are not average folks. They're exceptional people.
Yeah.
And you're teaching them to go off and teach that level of exceptionalism to the troops.
Yeah.
Okay? They're setting the good example. Mm-hmm. They know about setting a good example. They are the example. They've been the example. And all I'm doing is teaching them how to teach.
Yeah.
That's all I'm doing. I'm working with them all the time. And at the same time, I'm still reserve. Mm-hmm. I was a senior chief. Yeah, I was a senior chief it was to start with, and master chief when I retired. And my reserve boss was over across the street. Mm-hmm. And it was not uncommon at all for me to get a telephone call over at instructor training school. Master Chief, can you come on over and have a chat with the medic readiness commander about whatever? Mm-hmm. And I'd tell my other one, say, I got to go play military for a little while. And then I'd just walk across the street in my jacket and tie, walk on in and say, okay, Captain, what's up? Mm-hmm. What are we doing? So it never really was a transition per se. I guess it was, but it wasn't anything that it was a matter of, oh, gee, I got to get a new job. Oh, no, none of that. It was pretty smooth.
Okay.
Very smooth.
Yeah.
The same thing when I go on in to a high school. Mm-hmm. One high school in particular, Zion Benton High School, has a Navy ROTC program, outstanding one. And many times I'll get a call, say, hey, would you come on in there and relieve Master Chief so-and-so for a little while? He needs a sub. Would you go on in and sub in the ROTC? Mm-hmm. Well, you betcha. Absolutely. Yeah. And the kids don't know what it means. Mm-hmm. The freshman, sophomore. Okay, so you're a Master Chief. So what? That'll mean nothing to him. Okay? It means something to the military guy, but it means nothing to the kid. Okay? And that's, well, you know where I'm coming from.
Oh, yeah. I get you. I just want to know, you know, during your 30 years, and you got to see both sides of the house and do instruction, and I mean, you did a little bit of everything. What are some of the major changes you've seen happen in the Navy, and from when you joined through the Vietnam era to the modern era?
I don't know that it's necessarily just a matter of the military itself, but it's the world that we live in today is so different. First of all, I came in BC, before chips, okay? Before computers.
Okay.
I came in when, well, example, I'm working at Camp, I was at Camp Pendleton on special projects. And one of the special projects that I was trying to push was to encourage somebody like IBM or some other manufacturer of typewriters to develop a battery-operated OCR typewriter. Now, for us today, that's nothing. Back in those days, that was, You can't, Okay.
To develop a what?
Develop a what? You out of your mind? Well, I'm not totally out of my mind, but partially, all right? But the idea of it was optical character recognition was necessary in order for the evaluations to be read by a scanner. Okay? Well, if the guy can't type with an electric typewriter, that OCR ain't going to work.
Yeah.
Just an example. Now, the change from when I was in Vietnam, I made one call home once. Telephone call. And it was over, and I'm doing it by a Mars station, okay? Once.
Yeah.
Now someone, American Sniper,
Yeah.
he says, "Oops, honey, I gotta go. I got incoming. I'll talk to you later." Click. He hangs up the phone. He'd been talking to her by satellite phone from Afghanistan or wherever he happened to be at the time. Okay. We never thought of that. It never dawned on us. I mean, the only information that the parents were going to receive was either a letter from the individual service member or a telegram. On behalf of the president, I'm sorry to inform you.
Yeah.
Okay? So that the technology of the world that we live in today has changed the military dramatically. It's made us much more efficient. The military overall is in much better physical condition today than it ever was in the past. I mean, I found a piece of paper the other day called PF Personal Performance PST, I think it was.
PFT?
Performance whatever. PS. Can you do certain things and it's signed off? Got to have it initialed and so on, so on, so on, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
PFT sheets, at least for us, are what we record our PT scores on after a test.
Yeah. Well, now we used to do that kind of stuff with a piece of paper, and we'd have to carry that thing around with us, making sure that we get it all initialed and signed off and all this other kind of stuff and done. Okay. We don't do that stuff no more. I mean, now it's pushed into the computer. You can do so and so. You boom, boom, boom. Here's your test scores. This, that, so on and so forth. It's on a chip. Here's your chip. Take it and go on your way. That's the change.
Okay.
The computer chip has made the biggest change in the military ever, in my opinion.
Okay.
Physical fitness, incredibly different today. I never had my troops on out there doing PT. You got to be kidding me. Prop yourself underneath a tree, get some sleep, and get ready to go. Get some sleep. We're going here, going again.
Yeah.
All right? Now, you'd be PTing people. That never happened. Get yourself in physical shape. You go run a mile and a half. I never been any ship anywhere where you had to run a mile and a half. Give me a break. That's not the point. But the point of being in better condition, because if you get wounded, you recover faster. That's the mindset we have to get across. We never did that.
Okay.
We never did that. That's a different. That's to me the primary thing. Obviously, the pay's better. I mean, when I came in, it was $95 a month. Okay, whether you need it or not.
But $95 a month back then could buy a lot more than it could now.
It was absolutely true.
You could get a beer for what, 25 cents or something?
Yeah, you can get 2 of them for 25 cents if you're a good pool shot.
Yeah.
But but the money goes went further than it does today. But there's still a number of the same traps are still there. You know, sailors doing dumb stuff. Military kids going out and doing dumb stuff.
Yeah.
That still happens. Okay. But we watch. We're smarter. We're smarter. We're smarter today than we were. I think that there's a respect for the seniors is still there. I don't think that's been lost anywhere along the line. I think it's still there. You still got the respect for the guy that's been there, done that, and comes back with holes in it. You know, I remember a Master Chief I worked with who was a UDT SEAL hospital corpsman.
Oh, man.
9 Purple Hearts.
Oh, wow.
UDT device sat right there. He had ribbons and went all the way up the line. Okay? Easiest, calmest guy. But I'll tell you what, he had a look about him that, I will hurt you. Okay?
It's nice to meet you. I'm also planning on how I'm going to kill you.
Exactly. And so it's we ever respect it. I see his name pop up every once in a while. Well, Master Chief Gray Rather was my instructor at Hospital Corps School. Well, yeah. You'd remember that forever. He'd walk in service dress blues. You'd remember that forever.
Yeah.
Okay? One look at him. All right? I saw somebody on TV the other day, a general that's got ribbons that go from here to here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Petraeus.
Yep. He's got a lot.
You know? I mean, what a respectful, what a fantastic leader. All right? We still got good leaders today. The difference of it is today, I think, more so than anything else, and I think we got more politics in the game today than we had before. That's just my view. We had politics before. But we also said, up yours. You know, I mean, we were told in Vietnam, you will not have a round in your chamber during daylight hours. Matter of fact, you won't even have a clip in your weapon during daylight hours. And we're in a bush? I don't think so.
We're having a round in the chamber, safety off. This is my safety in the bush.
You got it. Exactly.
Yeah.
And we basically said, it was kind of a, we know what the word says. Leave the guys alone. They know what they're doing. Leave them be. Leave them be. So that's kind of where I'm at there.
Okay. I just need to ask, what was a lot of the stuff you and Jay Williams did together?
What?
You and Jay Williams working together, because I learned a lot. I have a lot of respect for him. So.
First of all, he is an exceptional officer who I think, because he is such an exceptional officer and such an exceptional person, that's why he never made admiral. Okay? But as far as two of the funniest things that ever happened. We were on a trip somewhere, and this unit was just, what we were hearing just didn't make sense. And so one of the chiefs were going on out to the car, going out to get a smoke, and I said, I'll go along with you and get a cup of coffee. We'll chat a bit.
Yeah.
So he's having a smoke, and I quit smoking by that time. We're having a cup of coffee, and I'd walk back on in after having a little discussion and say, all right, Captain, this is what I think is going on. He said, how the hell did you figure that out? I said, I just had a cup of coffee with the people that know. And he started to laugh. He said, I could get more information out of people with a cup of coffee and a cigarette than he could all day trying to grill them. Yeah. Okay? But in contrast, I remember going into a reserve center one time where there was we we came from a pretty high spot, and he was number 2 or number 3 man in the region.
Yeah.
All right, pay attention.
Yeah.
He didn't come in there by accident.
No.
He shows up one morning, and there was a nothing working on the front gate. The CO was not anywhere to be seen. Jay says, well, looks at one of the commanders and says, well, which one of us is going to go on in there and have that young lieutenant lock his heels? And the commander says, I think that would be a good job for me. And all of a sudden, things just started to relax and go very, very, very quickly. As soon as that commander walked in there and had a little breakfast with that young lieutenant, squared that lieutenant away, and everything went well for the rest of the day. But anyway, that's typical for Jay. That's just typical. Outside of his greasy spoon breakfast place. Grand Rapids, Michigan. Anyway, that's kind of he's just he's one of those types of guys that he would be more than just the captain.
Mm-hmm.
He's the type of guy you can sit down and shoot the breeze with, and and you know you feel like he's one of the guys, but you know very well when somebody's got your back. Jay's got your back. You know, he also knew we had his too. You know, we're doing everything we can to keep the people away, keep him out of his way.
Yeah. When he was my professor, I would go to his office hours just to chat with him. I wouldn't have questions about class. It'd just be, I'm gonna go hang out with Captain Williams for a little while, and he would come to all of our ROTC events. You know,
Absolutely.
Even though we were Army ROTC,
Absolutely.
he'd still show up and.
And when he walks in with full battle gear on, with full dress blues, it's impressive.
And he was real proud because he could still fit in them.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
He walks right in.
He's way ahead of me. I don't fit in mine no more. Okay.
He does make he and one of the history professors, Dr. Cardoza, they've been teaching there for a long time. They have a running rivalry because I think Captain Williams and Dr. Cardoza used to weightlift together at the gym every day, and Dr. Cardoza still does, and as Captain Williams will readily admit, he goes almost every day. He almost goes every day. But
yes,
they
indeed.
like to
Indeed.
jab back and forth.
You are lucky beyond words to have that gentleman as a professor.
Yeah,
Lucky beyond words. Well, how are we doing?
Just about done. The last question I always like to ask is, do you have any habits from your time in the military that you still find yourself keeping to this day?
Habits. Well, it's difficult to tell that for certain because I developed those habits almost 50 years ago. I think the primary habit that I developed was probably I just honed it a little bit more. I had it to start with. And the primary habit is be 15 to 20 minutes early for everything.
Yep.
Every evolution, be there early. I hate being late for anything. I was concerned coming in here this morning in regards to being late getting here. I left at 8 o'clock to leave. Only drove 60-some miles, but 60-some miles is worthwhile. But at the same time, I don't want to be late. I don't want to be in. We're supposed to be here at 10 o'clock. You're going to be here at 10 o'clock. Let's go. Be ready to go. So I think it's more that, and it's also a matter of. I think I developed a certain level of firmness, but I've also tried to temper that firmness with understanding that, you know, listen, kid, this is what you need to do. And I will do it in schools to this day. I will take a young freshman or a sophomore when I get them in school that needs to get their chain jerked, and I'm pretty apt to tell them, now listen, you. And just in no uncertain terms, this is what I see, this is what you're capable of, this is what you're not doing, and if you were working for me, I'd be a foot in your butt every day. And do that with a smile, of course. And The reason for that is because most folks don't do their as well as they're capable of doing. They need to have somebody say, listen, you, and I'm perfectly willing to be that listen, you guy. And I am. And I think that's a habit that I picked up over the years. I remember working for a senior chief, subsequently Master Chief Ignacio Garcia Gonzalez, Speedy. And Speedy Gonzalez was an incredible, absolutely incredible Master Chief. And he and I worked together in the drug business. And I learned a lot about life from Speedy Gonzalez. Okay? And he was the biggest bullshit artist you ever saw in your life. But I'm going to tell you what, you don't cross that guy. No. You know, and that's one of the things that I've learned. I think I learned from Speedy, and I learned from a few others. But he's the one that jumps out at me as far as a Master Chief that I could say as an example. So that's about all I can think of in those terms.
Okay. And then the big idea of the Pritzkers were the museum dedicated to the citizen soldier. So what does citizen soldier mean to you?
Well, I have become more of a student of history. And President Washington, at the end of the Revolutionary War, wanted to send all of the troops back home, and if they're needed, to call them back up when we need them. President Jefferson did not want to have an active military at all. And if he'd had his druthers, he would have, but the Barbary pirates put him in a spot where he had to. And I think what we have done over the years, this has evolved to the point where we have an active duty contingent, we have a reserve contingent, we have varying levels of reserve contingencies. The reserve contingencies in particular are more in line with the concept of a citizen soldier than any others, in my view, and the reason for that being most of them have real jobs, and then once a month they go off and they play sailor, or they play army, or they play marine as such. The active duty side of the house, on the other hand, we want them to have the option at the end of a 4-year term. What do you want to do? You want to stick around, or you want to go home? What do you want to do? We don't get to the point where you got to, unless a war is on. War's a different situation. But as long as there's not a war going on, you want to go home, go home. Hang on to your DD-214. You may want to come back. Join a reserve program. Do something along that line. I think it's something that we have been able to do as a nation, granted with different leadership styles and so on and so forth over the many years of it. But I think when you look at the rosters of the people that were killed in World War II and World War I, for that matter, many of them had an R at the end of their designation, USNR, USAR, etc. My father-in-law was an Army Reserve Lieutenant Colonel when he retired. He was an Army Captain Reserve when he came back from New Guinea. He fit in, he transitioned relatively quickly in, but he still had the military attitude. and it was still there. And I think that whole concept of the citizen soldier, I think the reserve program does a very, very good job of showing that package, in my view.
Okay.
Not sure that answers your question, but that's where I see.
All right. Is there anything else? Anything we missed?
Not that I can think of. I probably told you way more than you wanted to hear.
Oh, that was great.